The first time my little brother put a sword through my back, I remember being mostly annoyed about the timing. We were standing on a cliff over a burning sect. The child of destiny was monologuing about fate the way those people always do, and I was 3 seconds from finishing the one technique that could have turned the whole thing around. And then there was this cold, wet feeling under my ribs, and I looked down, and there was about a foot of blade poking out of my chest, and I thought, sword forging really has come a long way this century. Then I turned my head because I wanted to see his face. That was always the part that got me, not the dying, the face. He had this expression like he was doing something brave. Like he'd finally worked up the courage to do the right thing. This kid I taught to hold a sword. This kid I gave up my own breakthroughs for 3 lives running so he could have the pills I earned. And he looked at me over the hilt with wet, shining, heroic eyes and said, "I'm sorry, senior brother, but you've become a monster." I wanted to tell him a monster wouldn't have paid your entrance fees, you little raisin, but you don't get long speeches with a lung that's on the outside. That was death number 1, more or less. I say more or less because I stopped keeping an exact count somewhere around 40. After a while, the betrayals blur together. Different sects, different swords, different heroic little faces, same basic customer experience. Someone I loved would look me in the eye, decide I was the villain of the story, and hand my head to a boy with glowing tattoos and a destiny, because that was my job. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted it. I didn't fill out an application. I just woke up one day at 16 in a cold snowdrift in a stranger's world with a panel of light hanging in front of my eyes that read in cheerful gold letters, "Child of Destiny Villain System. Congratulations, host, your role is assigned. You are the designated antagonist. Your suffering, defeat, and death will forge the chosen one's legend. Objectives will be provided." Great, wonderful, love that for me. I fought it, obviously. First few lives I played the part, thinking if I was a good enough villain I'd at least get a good enough death, and the world would let me rest. It did not. Then I got angry, and I tried to just win, kill the chosen one before he could grow, break the story over my knee. Turns out the whole universe is the plot armor. Every trap I set became his lucky break. Every mountain I threw at him grew a staircase. I raged, I schemed, I went a little bit insane in there around life 60, and every single time it ended the same way. Someone with my own blood or my own name in their mouth, deciding I had to die, and being right about it in the only way that mattered, which is that I did. The only thing that ever came with me across the deaths was her. May lie, she started as the system, just a voice and a panel back at the beginning. But something about being reborn 100 times, tied to one soul, wore a person into her. Somewhere around the 10th or 20th reset she had a body. Somewhere after that she had opinions. And by the time we get to the part of the story I actually want to tell you about, she was a girl who sat on my shoulder eating candied fruit and telling me in the flattest possible voice that I was an idiot. Which is where we start. Life 100. I opened my eyes on the peak of Lingyun Mountain with the sun trying to personally assassinate me, and for one long, stupid second, I forgot which death I'd just walked out of. Then it all came back at once, the way it always did, the whole 100 of them stacked up in my head like a very depressing photo album, and I sat up in the thin grass with a little porcelain bottle already in my hand. Fire Spirit Essence. I knew that bottle. I'd won it off a flame python in a gorge 2 valleys east at dawn in about 40 other lives. I knew the timing of everything. That was the one gift 100 resets gives you. I'd read the ending of this book so many times I could recite it in my sleep. In 4 days, there was a sect tournament. In 6, a junior sibling would begin resenting me. In a year, the chosen one would take his first real step toward greatness, and I would take my first real step toward another cliff and another apologetic sword. "You're doing the thing," Mei Lai said. She was maybe 3 inches tall that morning, perched on my knee, gnawing a piece of dried hawthorn as big as her head. Rebooting always cost her. She came back small and slow and then filled back in over days. "What thing?" I said. "The thing where you look at that bottle and start planning the walk to the gorge. The flame python, the essence. Then back to the sect for the tournament because Master will need you because the juniors will need you," she swallowed. 99 times you've done that walk. It ends in a cliff every single time, and you're doing it again with your face." "I'm not." "Chang Sheng." She looked up at me. She had the kind of small face that could make one word land like a slap. "They are not worth it. Your master watched a demon cut your foundation to ribbons and told you that you'd been too heavy-handed." Your juniors stood over your resources, dividing them up while your body was still warm. 99 times. And you keep walking back up that mountain to protect them because a light panel told you it was your job. I looked at the bottle for a while. The thing about being told you're the villain 100 times is that eventually you start to wonder who's really the villain in a story where the same man keeps trying to save everyone and keeps getting a sword for it. You know what? I said. To hell with it. To hell with what, specifically? Be specific. I want it on the record. The destiny, the role. The villain job, the whole thing. I felt something come loose in my chest that had been clenched for 100 lifetimes. Whoever wants to be the great villain of this world can be it. Sign-ups open. I quit. Mei Lai went very still. Then she grew all at once from 3 inches to a young woman standing in the grass in a gown the color of poured gold and fresh blood, her hair loose, her eyes bright and dangerous, and for the first time in 100 lives, happy. Finally, she breathed. She turned to the empty air where the panel lived, that smug gold rectangle that only the two of us could see, the child of destiny villain system, our warden of 100 years, reached out with both hands, took it by its edges like it was a sheet of paper, and tore it in half. It screamed. The world's least sympathetic sound, a light panel screaming. She threw the pieces over her shoulder and didn't watch them fall. That should have been the end of it. It was not, because destiny doesn't process resignations. The instant the panel tore, I felt it. A vast, patient, invisible pressure descending on me from everywhere at once, gentle as a hand steering a child, and every fiber of my body suddenly wanted to stand up and start walking. Back up the mountain, back to Snow Moon Peak, back to Master who'll need you for the tournament, back into the part, back onto the rails. It wasn't a voice. It was worse than a voice. It was the whole sky quietly deciding where my feet went. The formless will, the heavenly Tao's hand on the story. In 100 lives, I had never once beaten it. I'd only ever been dragged. I got about half a step before Mei Lai stopped it. I've watched a lot of impressive things across my deaths. I have seen mountains walk and seas stand up on their tails. I had never seen anything like the look on her face right then, because it wasn't power, it was insult. She was insulted, on my behalf, after 100 years. He said, she told the sky very quietly, that he quit. Behind her, 99 beams of pale light tore up out of the ground. I understood distantly that those were us, the foundations of 99 buried lives, everything the two of us had ever managed to accumulate and drag through the resets. They braided together over her open hand into a single sword of azure light, taller than the peak, humming a note that made my teeth ache. And she swung it at the heavens. Not at an enemy, at the heavens. At the sky itself, at the smug, invisible hand that had steered me off 100 cliffs. The blade came down and the whole world flinched. Across the entire azure profound continent, in that instant, old and terrible things that had been sleeping for a very long time opened one eye. In a mountain far to the south, a fat old Taoist priest choked on his wine, felt that azure line get carved across the roof of the world, and quietly decided he would not be leaving his cave for the next 500 years. Thank you, no. Diviners went blind. Star readers wept. Somewhere a heaven and earth realm recluse who hadn't stood up in an age stood up, and the hand on my feet let go. For the first time in 100 lifetimes, I stood on a mountain in the morning, and my body was my own. I got about one full breath to enjoy it before Mei Lai started to come apart. That sword had been every scrap of foundation we owned, and swinging it at the sky itself was more than she had to give. She swayed, and where she swayed, the morning light went straight through her, because she was going ethereal, thinning out like breath on cold glass. Dissolving, I didn't think. That's the honest version. People like to imagine you have some grand internal debate at the important moments. I had none. I reached into the system space, the little pocket of void that had survived the panel tearing, a black room hung with 99 faint stars, every star a life's worth of hard-won treasure. The only savings account a dead man carries between graves. And I took all of it, 99 stars, 100 years of gritted teeth accumulation, and I crushed it in my fist. Chang Sheng, she started, alarmed, solidifying as the raw origin poured back into her. You need those. Those are everything you. These I can find again, I said, and I closed my hand until the last star burst. You're the only one I can't. 99 lives of savings, gone in a breath, to keep one girl from fading on a mountaintop. If the panel had still been there, it would have flagged it as the single worst strategic decision in the history of the host. Best money I ever spent. One thing survived the fire. When the stars burned out, a single small porcelain bottle rolled out of the ash of the system space and came to rest against my knee, whole and cool, giving off a faint, warm light that had no business surviving what I'd just done to everything around it. I knew that bottle, too. 9 revolutions pure yang pill. The will of heaven, some texts called it, a pill so contrary and so pure that fate itself couldn't quite bring itself to destroy it. Huh, Mei Lai said, sitting up in the grass, whole again, staring at the little bottle glowing between us. It kept one, I agreed. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. But I had a mountain to walk down and a sect to disappoint, and for the first time in 100 lives, I was walking down that mountain because I wanted to, not because the sky told me to. Nobody up there knew it yet, but their villain had just handed in his notice, and I intended to enjoy my retirement. Now you might think the natural next move for a man who just quit being the villain is to run. New name, new mountain, never look back. And I'd have loved that. But I had a debt to pay first, and I've never been able to sleep with a debt on the books, which is honestly a large part of how I ended up a 100-time villain in the first place. So I walked back up to Snow Moon Peak, and on the way I broke myself. Not metaphorically. I sat down under a pine tree and I deliberately dispersed my own cultivation, unspooled the whole thing, thread by thread, until the vast pressure I'd carried up the mountain thinned out to nothing and I was, to any master's spiritual sense, a cripple. A man whose foundation had shattered. A man with nothing left. You're enjoying this too much, Mei Lai observed from my collar. I'm enjoying it exactly the right amount, I said. You want out of a sect, you can beg or you can be worthless. Nobody keeps a worthless disciple. Watch. Snow Moon Peak was just as I remembered it, which is to say cold and beautiful and full of people who had never once looked for my body. My master, the immortal Ru Lan, had come out of her latest seclusion, and the peak was arranged around her, the way iron filings arrange around a magnet. My 3 junior siblings orbited her, Ming-Zi, Chen-Lu, Zio, Hua, the 3 prodigies I'd raised, glowing, fussing, competing to hand her tea. Nobody had waited for me. There was a sect tournament in 4 days, and I was supposed to be arranging the whole thing, and not one of them had noticed their eldest brother wasn't on the mountain. Here's the part I want you to sit with because it tells you everything. Each of those 3 juniors was, at that moment, carrying a foundation repair pill in their sleeve. I know because I got them those pills. Months ago, quietly out of my own contribution points, from a favor at Dan Peak, 1 apiece, because I knew this life's road was rough and I wanted my little siblings to have a safety net. A foundation repair pill will mend a shattered foundation like mine. That's the entire point of the thing. I walked into that hall a cripple, in front of the 3 people I'd bankrupted myself to protect, and every one of them had the cure in their sleeve, and I watched 3 sets of eyes do the same small, quiet math. And 3 sleeves stayed shut. Ming-Zi, my eldest junior brother, actually had to fight down a smile, because if the eldest is ruined, the eldest is gone, and then the second becomes the first. I watched him realize it. I watched him like it. Your foundation is destroyed, Ru Lan said. She was looking at me the way you look at a chair that's broken a leg, not unkind, just done. There will be no spirit accumulation for you this life. I'm sorry, Bai Fan. Bai Fan. That was the Tao name she'd given me, the day she pulled a half-frozen child out of a snowdrift and decided to keep him. Lone Star Cub. She used to say it like it meant something. Master, I said, and I made my voice small and hollow, which wasn't even hard. Then I'd like to leave the mountain, leave the sect. There's nothing here for a cripple. Let me go be nobody somewhere quiet. The hall went very still. Ming-Zi's face did a complicated thing where the joy of me leaving fought the horror of me saying so out loud, and joy won. We'll discuss it later, Ru Lan said, which is what people say when they've already decided but don't want to be caught deciding. The tournament first. Ming-Zi, you'll lead your brother and sisters to the Flying Immortal Sect Exchange in 5 days. Represent Snow Moon Peak well. And that was that. She turned back to prepping the golden children for the show, and I bowed to her back, and I went to what used to be my courtyard. It was a shabby little place at the edge of the peak because the eldest disciple's dignity was never a priority. Inside were the things I'd made and left behind. Stacks of maps, charts, notes, years of research into the Xuanji secret realm, every single page made for them. Which path suited Ming-Zi's meridians, where Chen Lu should stand to catch a certain opportunity. What Zio Hua needed to avoid so she wouldn't die. Gift after gift after gift, sitting in the dust unread because I was leaving and it had never once occurred to me to stop making them. I picked up a candied hawthorn from a paper twist on the table, ate half, gave the other half to the 3-inch girl on my shoulder. You could just take these with you, Mei Lai said, chewing. Or burn them. Spite is very healthy, I've read. Leave them, I said. Let's see what they do with the answers when they can't read the questions. That night I paid my debt. The moon was full, which mattered, because a full moon was when the immortal Ru Lan's greatest secret came closest to killing her. She had a mystic yin body, the reason her talent was monstrous, the reason cultivation came to her the way breathing came to everyone else. It was also a slow suicide. The mystic yin power that made her a genius was, every full moon, 1 degree closer to devouring her from the inside. She'd spent decades holding it off. She would spend in most of my lives decades more, and eventually it would cost her everything. She never knew that I knew. She never knew that for years, in life after life, it was me quietly hunting down anything with pure yang in it and finding excuses to leave it where she'd use it. Everyone envied her the easy road. I was the only one who ever noticed she was walking it over a pit. I wore Mei Lai as a feathered robe. She could do that, turn herself into a garment that made me a hole in the world, unseeable, unsensible, and I walked straight through the layered formations around her immortal cave like they were morning fog. She sat in meditation at the heart of it, jaw tight, frost forming on her eyelashes as the yin power clawed at her alone because she was always alone with this. I took out the little bottle, the one thing the fire had spared. 9 revolutions pure yang pill, the will of heaven, the single most valuable object left in my possession, the thing that could have restarted my entire cultivation from scratch. I put it in her. A wisp of pure yang, guided gently into the core of her, threading into that cold and hungry thing and banking its fire. Her breathing eased. The frost on her lashes melted and ran down her still face like she was crying in her sleep, which she wasn't. She just didn't know yet that someone had reached into the worst night of her month and turned the temperature up. 100 lives you spent pure yang on her, Mei Lai said in my ear, and for once there was no bite in it. Just something tired. And she called you heavy-handed and let a demon carve your foundation. I know, and you're doing it again. Last time, I said, it squares us, that's all it is. I bowed to her, a full bow, the kind you give someone who once pulled you out of the snow before either of you knew how it would end. You and I told the sleeping woman, are no longer indebted by karma. And I felt it happen. Somewhere under the world, the thin, bright thread of fate that had tied the two of us together across 100 lifetimes, master and disciple, savior and saved, the whole tangled account, pulled taut and simply snapped. Clean, painless, gone. I'd freed her. I'd freed myself. I just hadn't told her which one of us I was doing it for. The next morning, the whole sect knew the crippled eldest disciple wanted to leave because my 2 junior sisters had made sure of it, still furious that in this life, like every life, I'd kept them away from the golden boy on the main peak, the sect leader's precious son, the child of destiny himself. Petty revenge, spreading a little gossip. It cost Ru Lan face. Even the master of Dan Peak asked her about it, gently, the way you ask about a stain. And a master who's losing face over a disciple stops fighting to keep him. She summoned me. She held out the jade token, my life token, keyed to a drop of my own essence blood, the little green stone that said I belonged to this sect. Returning it meant leaving for good. Take it, she said. Cold again, the master again, the secret midnight kindness I'd done her sealed behind a face that would never know it happened. Go where you like, but you carry the name of Snow Moon Peak, cripple or not. If you tarnish this sect, if you make me regret this, I will find you and I will cleanse you from it myself. Do you understand? I understand, master. I took the token, I bowed. I walked out. Behind me, before I'd even cleared the gate, I heard her name Mingzi, the new eldest disciple, heard the delight crack his voice, heard her send the 3 of them off to the exchange in 5 days. My replacements, delivered before I was even cold. Nobody walked me to the gate. Fine, a clean break is a clean break. I'd have hated a farewell party anyway. I just didn't know yet that the mountain wasn't done with me, or that 4 steps past its gate, someone was already standing in the road, waiting to kill the cripple. And that killing me was about to be the single worst decision of his short, greedy life. Here's a thing about being a dead man walking. Nobody watches where you go. The gate disciples watch me leave with that soft, comfortable pity people save for someone else's tragedy. Poor cripple, poor lone star cub, foundation broken, off to die in a ditch somewhere quiet. Up on the main peak, the child of destiny himself, Zio Jian, the sect leader's illegitimate son, the golden boy the whole world was arranged to elevate, felt a strange hollow twist in his chest and couldn't name it. His stepping stone had walked off the board. He didn't know why that bothered him. He sent a dark guard to quietly follow the cripple, just in case. Even the chosen one's instincts knew something was wrong with the story. He just thought it was me leaving. It was me leaving on purpose. I made it about 4 steps down the road outside Xiandao City before the world folded shut around me. A concealment array. A good one. The kind that turns a stretch of open road into a sealed killing room where no one outside will hear you scream. The man who sprang it stepped out of the shimmer with a smile I recognized from a dozen lives. Wai Hong, a Dan Peak disciple, scion of the Fang family, and a person who had coveted my quiet little spirit medicine supply chain for years the way a weasel covets a henhouse. "Bai Fan," he said, savoring it. "The great eldest disciple. Look at you, no foundation, no sect behind you, no one who will come looking." He spread his hands at the sealed road. "I've wanted this for a very long time." Beside him stood the other one. Older gray, an aura like a cellar that hadn't been opened in years. Wai Hong called him fourth uncle. I called him privately a problem because that aura wasn't Dan Peak alchemy, it was devil path, the real thing, peak spirit accumulation, a demon cultivator hiding inside a righteous sect. Which told me something delicious. It told me the rot in the Fang family went all the way down. "He's already ruined, nephew," fourth uncle murmured, uneasy, watching me not react. "Just kill him and go." "No," said Mengao, because greedy men never can just do the thing. "I want him to know it's me." So I let him have his moment, and then I took 4 steps. I want to be precise about this because it's the first time in this life I let anyone see what I actually was, and I did it on purpose, for an audience of 2 who were about to stop being able to tell anyone. First step. The body-forging aura they'd seen crumbled back into place, not broken, folded. I let it fill back in. Peak body forging. Second step. Peak inner Kai, the air around me went heavy. Third step. Protective aura, a skin of light, and the concealment array they'd sprung on me groaned like a rope under a falling anchor. Fourth step. Spirit accumulation complete, and not the thin, ordinary kind. When a real spirit accumulation cultivator condenses his spiritual charm, it holds a fragment of the self. When I condensed mine, it held a world. The killing room lit up from the inside like someone had opened a door onto noon. Fourth uncle stopped being uneasy and started being terrified, which was the correct response and about 2 seconds too late. "Run!" he barked at his nephew, "run!" And he did the thing cornered devil cultivators do. He set himself on fire. A forbidden art, myriad ghosts devour souls, burning his own life to summon a howling tide of stolen faces to drown me. I raised one hand. It was almost lazy. A palm of plain golden light met the tide of ghosts, and the tide of ghosts simply stopped existing, the way a candle stops existing when you close a door on the sun. Then I closed my fingers, gently, the way you'd catch a moth, and fourth uncle, peak spirit accumulation, a demon who'd murdered his way up out of a cellar, came apart into a fine red mist that drifted a moment on the sealed air and settled. Wai Hong didn't run. To his credit or his stupidity, he tried his trump cards, a Dan Peak life-saving talisman, a Fang family bloodline treasure, the little safety nets a rich scion carries. They shattered like frost. He got as far as opening his mouth, and what came out wasn't a scream, it was a curse, because greed is the last thing to die in a man like that. "The Fang family," he choked, "will hunt you across the continent, they'll issue a blood kill order, they'll—" I let him finish. I'm not a monster. Then his blood kill order died against the Tao patterns already woven quietly around me, and then so did he. The road went quiet. "You know," Mei Lai said, uncurling from my sleeve to survey the very light dusting of former Wai Hong, "for a man in retirement, you have an active social calendar. They came to me. They did." She hopped down, walked a slow circle around the scene like a butcher pricing a cow. "So, are we doing the thing?" The thing, she meant the useful thing, because a smart dead man doesn't waste a good death. Here is what the world's records already said about me. Bai Fan, crippled eldest disciple of Snow Moon Peak, left the mountain to die. Here is what I wanted the world's records to say instead. Bai Fan, crippled eldest disciple of Snow Moon Peak, was ambushed and murdered by a demon cultivator and died fighting. So I set the stage. I took out the jade life token Ru Lan had made me return, the one keyed to my own essence blood, the one that would read to any master who checked it as the death of the man it belonged to, and I broke it, and I dropped the pieces in the churned dirt where a demon cultivator had just burned himself to ash. And beside it, torn and scorched, I left a scrap of Dan Peak cloth, fourth uncle's. A demon cultivator wearing Dan Peak colors, dead in a killing array over the corpse of a Fang family scion, next to the shattered token of a murdered Snow Moon disciple. I didn't lie once. I just arranged the truth into a shape that pointed exactly where I wanted it to point. Bai Fan, I told the empty road, dusting off my hands, died bravely today. Terrible loss. He'll be missed by absolutely no one, which is the part that makes it convincing. The dark guard that Zio Jian had sent to follow me arrived not long after, found the tableau, read it exactly as written, and carried the news back up the mountain. The Snow Moon great disciple had perished together with a demon cultivator. And the mountain, which had not walked me to the gate, which had divided my resources over my warm body 100 lives running, finally reacted to me. Ru Lan came off the peak like a thrown blade. She confirmed it herself, pressed the drop of essence blood in the token fragments, felt it match, felt the life behind it read as gone, and for one long moment the immortal Ru Lan, who had told me I was too heavy-handed while a demon carved my foundation, stood over a patch of churned dirt and could not move. I'd severed our karma the night before with a bow and a pill she'd never know about. I hadn't planned on giving her a graveside too. It was, I'll admit, a little more than I'd meant to do to her. But a clean break is a clean break. Then the law enforcement hall master arrived, and my staging did exactly what staging is for. He found the Dan Peak cloth on a demon cultivator's ashes. And he was not a stupid man. He looked at years of quiet accidents among sect disciples, at a demon cultivator wearing the colors of the sect's own pill peak, at a Fang family scion dead at the center of it, and the pattern he'd been unable to see for decades snapped into focus all at once. There was a devil mole in Dan Peak. There was rot in the Fang family. And a crippled eldest disciple, dying, had cracked it open with the last thing he did. Xiandao City went on a quiet lockdown. Investigators fanned out, and up on the main peak, the Child of Destiny gave an order, helped the law enforcement hall root out the traitor in Dan Peak, never once suspecting that his own instincts had just enlisted him, personally, into a dead man's revenge. I watched the first stone of it start to roll from a tea house 2 streets over, with a cup of something warm and a girl on my shoulder stealing my hawthorn. That's a lot of machinery for someone who quit, Mei Lai observed. I didn't quit having standards, I said. I quit having a role. There's a difference. The role wanted me to die for these people. Standards just want the Fang family to get what it's owed. She considered this. And what is the Fang family owed exactly? I thought about a family that, in the timeline I'd watched 100 times, grew fat and terrible under the Chosen One's rising sun. That refined its pills from living, screaming cultivators and called it progress. Everything, I said, and drank my tea. Now a dead man has free time. I spent mine watching Dao Heaven Sect discover, one small humiliation at a time, exactly how much of it had been quietly held together by the disciple they'd just buried. Start with the herbs. For years I'd run a little supply chain nobody thought about because nobody ever thinks about the person who makes the boring things work. I'd found the region's best spirit herb farmers, real ones, families who'd worked the same terraced valleys for generations. And I'd signed them to Dan Peak on fair terms, paid on time, no haggling, because you do not squeeze the people who grow your medicine. That quiet arrangement was why Dan Peak's pills were the best of the 10 sects. Cheap high-grade herbs in, miracle pills out. 50 years of tournament wins, partly, sat on the back of an old farmer and his granddaughter. The day after I died, Dan Peak sent someone new to make the seasons buy. And this new someone did what greedy sects always do when the adult leaves the room. He tried to renegotiate. Cheated the weights, tore up the old farmer's contract in his face to squeeze a better rate, made the old man grovel. I watched from across the market square, eating a sugar figurine shaped like a rabbit because Mei Lai had insisted on the rabbit. He's going to regret that, she said, delighted, working on a figurine shaped, for reasons of her own, like a smaller rabbit. He regretted it within the hour, because those farmers all talk to each other and an old man doesn't forget the face of the boy who made him beg. By nightfall, every herb family in the valley had, very politely and all at once, declined to sell Tao Heaven sect anything at all. And the old farmer and his granddaughter, little Zio, who used to trade me riddles for candy, didn't go under, because a young lord of the spirit medicine pavilion happened, purely by coincidence, to arrive that same afternoon with a generous 10-year contract and a warm smile. It was not a coincidence. I'd left the young lord a jade talisman weeks ago, calling in an old favor, with instructions to be in that market on that day. I like to tie my knots before I need them. So Dan Peake's cheap high-grade supply evaporated in an afternoon, and they were forced, grinding their teeth, to buy their medicine at a brutal markup from the very pavilion now sheltering the farmer they'd insulted. The pills got worse. The costs went up. Somewhere on a high peak, an alchemy master started having very bad days. While that little machine ran itself, I did some shopping of my own. There was a stall selling scrap stones, and among them a plain black rock, ugly, unremarkable, going for one low-grade spirit stone. I bought it. Melai raised an eyebrow. To anyone in the world, that stone was garbage. To me, it was a flying immortal Tao rhyme, the crystallized insight of some ancient master of the flying immortal body, sleeping in a rock. And in the timeline I'd watched 100 times, this exact stone drifted into Zio Giant's hands and became one of the trump cards that made the Chosen One shine. I put it in my sleeve for one low-grade spirit stone, and somewhere up on the main peak, the child of destiny felt a small, inexplicable pang of loss, like a word he'd meant to say slipping off the edge of his tongue. "You're stealing his birthday presents now," Melai said approvingly. "I'm doing early holiday shopping, big difference." Then the flying immortal sect arrived for the exchange, and I got to watch my favorite consequence of all. The flying immortal sect came in on a sky boat, all banners and cold beauty, led by their pride and terror, the flying immortal body genius Gao Ren. In every one of my 100 lives, this exchange went one way. Gao Ren humiliated the Tao Heaven Juniors, and it was carefully arranged so that only the Chosen One, Zio Jian, could eventually rise to answer him, another rung built into the ladder that lifted the golden boy. But Gao Ren had changed. And I knew exactly why, because it was my fault, in a way that hadn't happened yet. Somewhere on the road here, Gao Ren had overcultivated, fainted, and dreamed. In the dream, a man he couldn't see had beaten him flat with nothing but his fists. No immortal techniques, no treasures, just a body cultivator's plain hard hands. And when it was done, this dream man had crouched down, wiped a smear of blood off his own lip, looked at the wreckage of the great flying immortal genius and said mildly, "Nothing more than this," and then walked away. Gao Ren woke up a different person. Humbled, hungry, terrified of a stranger he'd never met. That dream man was me. Not this me, a me from a road not yet traveled. A splinter of 100 years bleeding backward into a world that no longer ran on rails. I hadn't done it on purpose. Some traces you leave just leak. So at the exchange, Gao Ren went up the platform and he swept the board. He beat the Dan Peake Sr. He beat every Spirit Peake's pride. He beat all 3 of my former junior siblings so easily it wasn't a fight, it was a chore. And when they finally, desperately, sent up the child of destiny himself, Zio Jian, the boy the entire world was built to elevate, Gao Ren traded him better than 100 rounds and then simply ended it, planted him, and looked down at the sect leader's precious son the way you look at a chore you've finished. "Nothing more than this," Gao Ren said, exactly the way the man in his dream had said it, and turned and left, taking the whole occasion with him. Sect leader Zio Guang's face, I'm told, was a study. This was supposed to be his son's coming out. His plan to build a legend for his illegitimate boy had just been publicly ground into the platform by a genius who wouldn't even stay to gloat. Zio Jian sat in the dust with his ears ringing, and for the first time the Chosen One tasted what the rest of us had been eating for 100 lives. Up in the stands, 3 former junior siblings of mine sat very quietly. Chen Lu, my second sister, stared at her own hands and felt, for the first time, the absence of the person who used to make sure she never lost. Somewhere in her chest, a small door opened that she couldn't close again. Zio Hua stayed cold. Some people are just built out of ice. And Ming Zi, new eldest, newly humiliated, decided the problem wasn't him. He went home that night and stole a sword technique jade slip out of my old courtyard, one I'd specifically refused to teach him because his foundation was too unstable to survive it. and he took it off to a quiet place to master it in secret, to prove he was more suited to it than I ever was. Remember that? It comes back around. As for me, I was in a restaurant across the city, minding my own tea, when Gao Ren walked in and stopped dead in the doorway with every hair on his body standing up. He didn't know why. His whole spirit was screaming the way a rabbit screams when a hawk's shadow crosses the grass. The dream man, the stranger who'd beaten him and said nothing more than this. Some animal part of him knew I was in the room, even if the rest of him was looking at an ordinary young man drinking tea. I nudged the pot toward the empty seat across from me. "Sit down before you fall down," I said. "The tea's better than the panic attack." He sat. He drank, and the terror eased out of his shoulders because that's what the tea was for. We talked Tao, the flying, immortal body, its beauty, its hidden flaw, and I said a few things about spirit accumulation that made his eyes go wide and stay wide, because they were things his own master had never grasped. Before he left, he traded me the ugly black stone for a shimmering jade he'd been carrying, a thing his sect thought was decorative, and I recognized instantly, because Mei Lai's eyes had already locked onto it and gone round as coins. The stone called to Gao Ren, he said. He had to have it. Fair enough. It was going to help him become the man who, one day, would burn his own immortal body to ash to kill a demon lord and save a city full of people who'd never know his name. I was happy to sell it to him for one low-grade spirit stone's worth of ugly rock and a piece of jade. "What did we just get?" I asked Mei Lai once he'd gone, once his master had come looking and found our seat already empty. She held up the shimmering jade, cradling it like a hatchling. "Huangliang Yaimeng," she breathed. "Yellow millet dream. It manipulates dreams. I drew this out of a villain's system in some reincarnation, then lost it lives ago." She looked up at me, and under the greed there was something sharper. "Chang Sheng, this shouldn't be here. Not in this world, not in his hands, not now. Do you understand what it means that it is?" I did. It meant the book had stopped writing itself the way it used to. It meant the world's rails were coming up under my feet. It meant that for the first time in 100 lives, I didn't know exactly what happened next. I sipped my tea and I found that I was smiling and that it was real. The Fang family thought they lived in Yangshan Prefecture. That was the decoy. Their true ancestral ground was a hidden valley outside Yangshan City, tucked into an earth vein like a tick under a dog's ear, and I was already walking there while the rest of the continent was still asking who'd murdered the crippled Snow Moon disciple. I want to be clear that I barely touched the Fang family. I just handed the world a thread and let the world pull. Weeks earlier, I'd passed an urgent jade slip to a certain shopkeeper of the righteous Kai Alliance, a fussy little man who was secretly an undercover inspector, and who was secretly, quietly out of his mind with grief, because the Fang family had taken his nephew and the boy had simply never come home. The slip told him where to look. Then Wei Hong died on a road with a demon cultivator in Dan Peak colors at his feet, and the law enforcement hall master matched the timing and pulled the thread, and the thread led down into the dark under the Fang family, and what was down there was a pill workshop. They refined their medicine from living cultivators. That's the part I hadn't invented, hadn't staged, hadn't needed to. It was simply true. In the world I'd watched rise 100 times, the Fang family grew rich and untouchable under the Chosen One's climbing sun. And this was how human beings fed into a cauldron, screaming, so that a genius somewhere could swallow a slightly better pill. I just made sure someone looked before the sun got high enough to cast a shadow over it. Sect leader Zhao Guang heard the law hall master's report and said, "Wipe the Fang family from the continent within the month." The righteous Kai Alliance issued a proclamation to every corner of the world, and overnight the Fang family went from proud clan to public enemy. Loose cultivators swarmed their strongholds by the hundreds, hungry for glory and loot, and found, behind the marble, cellars of drained skeletons and cages of the barely alive. After that, there was no mercy left to negotiate with. And Rulan came. She came to avenge her disciple, to avenge me, the dead man who'd severed our karma the night before with a bow she slept through, and she was terrible. She fought the 3 Fang old ancestors alone, 1 against 3, killed 1 outright and left the other 2 ruined. If the Fang family's ancestral formation hadn't been braided into the living earth vein, so that smashing it risked cracking the whole prefecture, she'd have finished them that hour. I did not go to watch her fight for my honor. I felt it was in poor taste to attend your own memorial and heckle. Instead, I went to a coast, because the end game of the Fang family arranged itself without me, and it arranged itself with a joke. The Fang head and his last old ancestor, cornered, did the sensible corner drat thing. They gathered the family's bloodline heirs and fled down a secret escape tunnel, a passage they dug in ancient secrecy so that no matter who came for them, the seed of the family would survive to grow again. The tunnel's hidden exit opened out under the seabed off the eastern coast. Under, specifically, the exact stretch of seabed where 3 enormous swords were about to be pulled up out of the water. But I'm ahead of myself, come to the coast. I'd stopped in a small saltand fish city crammed shoulder to shoulder with sword cultivators. No grand sect names among them, just loose cultivators and little schools, people who lived and died by a single blade. They were all there for the same reason, and the reason surfaced from the sea once every long while and stayed for 5 days. The 3 swords' immortal severing peak. 3 colossal stone peaks, shaped unmistakably like the hilts of 3 buried swords, rising slow and dripping out of the ocean. Legend said a mighty being had once driven 3 swords down through the world to pin an immortal in place. The great sects had picked the relic over long ago. A sword Tao old ancestor of the divine sword sect had gone up, comprehended every last drop of its sword intent, found not one opportunity waiting for him, and declared the place a beautiful empty husk. So the great sects left, and now only the small folk came to farm the faint, slowly regenerating sword intent that leaked off the peaks like warmth off a dying coal. A sword cultivator named Zhen Kai found me at a noodle stall and decided we were friends, in the easy way that lonely, decent people sometimes do. He was strong, protective aura, and honestly he could have broken through to spirit accumulation years ago, but he kept coming back to these peaks instead, chasing something he couldn't name. He offered to take me out with him. An old fisherman called Old who ferried us, the same weathered man who'd guided Zhen Kai to the peaks the very first time. I want you to hold onto Old who. He looks like nothing. He is not nothing. When the central peak broke the surface, every sword in that city trembled at once. Not the ones the cultivators carried, all of them. Blades in scabbards, blades on walls, a rusted cleaver behind a fish stall, and a sword someone had merely painted on a paper screen. Every edge in that place shivered toward the sea, singing the same faint high note. One sword emerges, and 10,000 swords answer. I stood at the bow of a fishing boat with a 3-inch girl on my shoulder and a broken sword humming quietly at my hip, and I felt the aura of a peerless divine blade that the great sects had walked right past, and it was familiar. It was so familiar it made my throat hurt. Mei Lai went very still beside me, and I knew she felt it too. "Chang Sheng," she said softly, not teasing now. I know," I said. "I don't know how, but I know." Because 100 lives is a long time to lose things in. You'd be amazed what you find at the bottom of the sea. We climbed onto the central peak, and the moment my friend Zhen Kai set foot on it beside me, something enormous and invisible bent in his favor. I felt his luck rocket toward the sky. The peak had just chosen him as its fated son, its little child of destiny. Except the peak answered to my will, so what it had really done was appoint Zhen Kai as the hand I'd act through. He didn't need to know that. Good men shouldn't have to know how the sausage of their good fortune gets made. Old Hu, the fisherman, watched me the whole climb with eyes that were suddenly not old at all. At the heart of the peak, from somewhere under the stone, an ancient voice rolled up through my bones. It didn't speak to Zhen Kai. It spoke to me the way the bell would later, the way everything old in this world eventually did, because old things recognize each other. People cultivate the Tao, it said, all of them for the sake of becoming immortals. But if the immortals themselves commit evil, then what? I didn't have to think about the answer. It came up out of me from a place older than this life. If immortals commit evil, I said, then immortals must be slain. And the peak pulled me under. I want to tell you what I saw, because I've kept it a long time and I've never had anyone to tell. I saw the last war of a dead epoch. I saw a lone swordsman standing against an ethereal thing that called itself an immortal, a being that had climbed the Tao by feeding all living things into the furnace of its own ascension, that burned entire worlds for firewood so that it, personally, could live forever. The swordsman was losing. Everyone loses to that kind of thing, eventually. That's what makes it evil, that it's built to win. And then someone came to help him. Up the river of time and space, against the current, a sword emperor at the absolute peak of the world stepped backward through the ages to reach that ancient battlefield. It was me, not this me. A me from a reincarnation so long ago I could barely feel the edges of it. A life where I'd climbed so high I'd sat at the summit of the whole world. And it still hadn't been enough, because the story still wanted me dead. In that life, I'd found a broken, rusted sword holding a will that refused to quit, and I'd used Melee to build a formation of traceability, and I'd sent my primordial spirit walking up the river of time to stand at a stranger's side in a war that was already over, to help slay an evil immortal in an epoch that wasn't even mine. And while my spirit was away up the river in the present of that life, the child of destiny, guided by that same patient invisible hand, walked into my hidden immortal cave, shattered my formations, and destroyed my emperor's body. The backlash tore my primordial spirit like wet paper. I was already dead and I hadn't finished dying, so I did what I always did. I spent the last of myself. On that ancient battlefield, my spirit burned itself down to the wick, and I raised 3 final swords, and I named them as I cut. Soul Extinction, Soul Cleaving. Immortal Slayer. 3 strokes, and the evil immortal that fed on worlds came apart, and that dead epoch got to keep on being a world, and the people in it lived, and never knew, and my primordial spirit scattered into nothing on the wind of the final blow. That reincarnation ended right there. Sword Emperor gone, one more dead villain, one more life with no grave. The vision let me go. I came back to myself standing on the central peak with wet cheeks, and I finally understood what I was looking at. The 3 swords' immortal severing peak was not a relic someone else had left behind. It was the sword. My sword, the immortal slaying stroke of a self I'd been 100 lifetimes ago, driven so deep into the bones of the world that it had outlived the epoch it saved, outlived my death, outlived the resets, and kept its edge, waiting across the ruin of ages for the one hand it would ever answer to. Mine. Do you understand what that meant? In 100 lives, everything I ever built was taken, stolen, credited to someone else, ground down and handed to the golden boy. Every good thing I made became his lucky break. And here at last, at the bottom of the sea, was one thing I'd left behind that had survived. One trace of me that fate hadn't been able to steal or bury or hand away. It had waited for me across the death of a world. I laughed, out loud, ugly, with tears still on my face, the way you laugh when the thing you'd stopped hoping for turns out to be real. Then I gathered them up. The 3 sword intents rose to me one after another, soul extinguishing, spirit severing, immortal slaying, and settled home, and my spirit accumulation cracked all the way to its peak in one breath, because reclaiming your own soul does tend to be good for the cultivation. Old Who went to one knee on the stone. Epoch survivor Who when, he said in a voice like a landslide, respectfully welcomes the world-protecting sword. Because to Old Who, to the little fishing line he came from, these had never been the immortal severing swords. They were the world-protecting swords, the salvation swords, the blades that had saved the world their ancestors lived in. He'd been guarding a coastline for an epoch, waiting for the hand that could raise them, ferrying sword cultivators out to a grave he wasn't allowed to open. And he just watched a young man in a teacher's plain robes weep on the peak and gather 3 sword intents home like calling dogs. I helped him up. Then I turned to the sea and I said the only thing there was to say. Sword, I told my own buried self. Rise. The 3 peaks came up out of the seabed like blades drawn from 3 vast sheaths, and the ocean stood back to let them. But first, before the stone tore free, before the world shook, I reached out and very gently ferried every terrified fisherman on every little boat safely to shore, Old Who's whole trembling line of them, because you do not save a world and drown the ferrymen doing it. The sky tried to stop me. Of course it did. Heavenly Tao clouds boiled up to suppress the rising peaks, the invisible hand, trying one more time to snatch my own sword out of my hands and set it aside for its chosen one. I pointed 2 fingers, sword fingers, at the heavens, and every sword intent on that peak answered me and me alone, and I opened the sky like a curtain. The old swordsman's broken blade flew up out of the deep and fought at my side, an ally across the death of ages, and one stroke of the 2 of us swept the clouds away. The relic came fully out of the sea. A new pinnacle of the sword Tao stood on the continent where there'd been only rumor. Far away, the child of destiny lifted his head, sensed a vast opportunity blooming on the eastern coast and began greedily to scheme his way toward it. And on Snow Moon Peak, the immortal Ru Lan felt that sword song roll across the world and went utterly silent, her cold, mystic yin heart caught, for one long moment, on a note she couldn't place and would never trace back to the disciple she'd just buried. "You're crying again," Mei Lai said on my shoulder, quiet. "Salt air," I said. "Sure," she said, and leaned her small head against my jaw and let me have it. Now a normal person who just raised a divine relic from the sea might keep it, sit on it, charge admission, build a sect around it, and rule the coast. I decided to give it away, not to a person, to everyone, every sword cultivator under heaven, no matter how small, no matter which no-name school or which lonely road. Because I'd spent 100 lives watching great sects hoard every good thing in the world and grind the small folk under their heels, and here in my hands was the one good thing fate had ever let me keep, and I found I didn't want to hoard it. Scatter infinite Tao, gather infinite Tao. Let 10,000 small swords come and leave their intent on the peak, and let the peak grow richer than any hoard ever could. I stayed out of sight for the actual diplomacy. Who when handled it, because when the Grand Elder of the Divine Sword Sect showed up to reclaim the relic his own sect had abandoned as worthless, someone needed to make a point, and I was on holiday. The Grand Elder came down the sky in full pomp, the Divine Sword Sect being the greatest sword Tao power of the age, to inform the assembled loose cultivators that this treasure now belonged, once again, to its rightful owners, meaning him. Who when let him finish. Then Hu Wen, an old fisherman nobody had looked at twice all week, released a single unseen thread of sword intent that punched the Grand Elder off the peak, dropped him into the sea, and casually shaved 30% of his sword intent off him on the way down. While the Grand Elder was still deciding which way was up, Hu Wen announced, on the order of the Peak Master, who preferred to remain unnamed, that the Three Swords' immortal severing peak was now open to every sword cultivator beneath the heavens forever, and that anyone who tried to monopolize it would die on it. The Divine Sword Sect specifically would be permitted in only if they could pass a sword formation first, which was Hu Wen turning the Grand Elder's own favorite line. "The sword in my hand is the only reason I need," politely back around and sliding it between his ribs. The Grand Elder left dripping and humiliated, vowing revenge to a coastline that had already stopped listening. The little folk stared. The guardian of the greatest sword relic of the age had just thrown open the gates and told them all to come in. Nobody in their lives had ever given them anything. They didn't know what to do with it. I did enjoy that part. Meanwhile, out under the sea, the Fang family finished dying, and it finished dying to a joke. Remember their escape tunnel, the ancient secret passage whose hidden exit opened under the eastern seabed, where the family's last bloodline heirs were even now crawling toward daylight and a fresh start. Its exit came up under the exact patch of ocean floor where the Three Swords had been embedded for an epoch. When I pulled the peaks free, the sea poured in to fill the wound they left, straight down the open tunnel, and the last of the Fang family drowned in the dark under the water while running from a doom they thought they'd outsmarted. Their assault had cost the Tao Heaven Sect dearly, too. A lot of disciples died at Yangshan because Dan Peak's downgraded pills failed in their hands mid-battle, one more small invoice for burying me. But the family that fed people into cauldrons was erased down to the seed, and I hadn't lifted a finger for the last of it. The sea did it. I just moved the furniture. Then the peak did something I hadn't planned, and it rearranged the sky. Zhen Kai, my noodle stall friend, now blessed by the intents I'd left him, reached deep into the relic and drew out 13 stars. Not metaphor, 13 actual primordial stars, the Southern Dipper's 6 which govern life and the Big Dipper's 7 which govern death. My own signature star sword Tao, from a life so far back I'd half forgotten it, stars that had never once existed in this world's sky. The sword intent came first, and the stars condensed after it, because that's how it works when the Tao is real and the sky is just decoration. The heavens hated it. Celestial phenomena across the continent lurched into chaos. In a high tower, a stargazer of the Myriad Star Sect who'd spent his whole life mapping the heavens looked up, saw 13 impossible stars burning where no stars should be, and wept, not from fear, but from the sudden, total understanding that he'd been a frog at the bottom of a well his entire life. The 13 stars anchored to me, and that's a problem the world will try to solve later because it can't devour those stars directly without the backlash killing it. So it'll try to have its chosen one defeat Zhen Kai and swallow the star power through him. a plan that assumes Zhen Kai loses, which, having met both of them, I found optimistic. Speaking of the Chosen One, Zio Jian did make it to the peak, chasing the opportunity his instincts screamed was his by right. And the peak, which recognized him as an enemy the instant he set his greedy foot on the central stone where my power was densest, tried very hard to reduce him to a fine paste. 10,000 swords wanted him dead. Only the heavenly Tao's frantic protection kept him breathing. He nearly got flattened by a burly cultivator's gravity sword petals, panicked, burned his one and only teleport talisman to escape, and fled into the ocean half-cooked, hair singed to the scalp, having gained precisely nothing. A death trap, he was heard to gasp, treading water, made especially for me. He wasn't wrong. It was made especially for him. It just wasn't made this life. Some furniture you don't have to move at all. It was always going to be in the way. I left the peak in Hu Wen's hands and Zhen Kai's heart, told my friend the only true thing I know about the Tao, everyone walks their own road, don't wait for mine, and went, because a token had reached me on the wind. Gao Ren had come out of seclusion, and he wanted his old friend Brother Chang. He had no idea what he was inviting. Neither entirely did I. I met Gao Ren at the Immortal Seeking residence in Immortal Seeking City, which is exactly as full of itself as it sounds. He'd grown peak spirit accumulation now, his flying immortal body nearly perfected, because the ugly black stone I'd sold him held the Tao rhyme of some ancient flying immortal master. And with a nudge from me, he'd found and begun mending the hidden flaw in his own body, the one his flaw expert elder had never even located. He was, by any honest measure, one of the most dangerous young men on the continent. He wanted to spar. His mouth wanted to spar. His body, the instant he suggested it, broke out in a full-length cold sweat because some deep animal in him remembered a dream where a man wiped his lip and said nothing more than this. So we compromised on a single palm press, a probe just to see. I pinned his hand without moving my feet. That was the whole probe from my side. From his side, a heartbeat later, the Kai that leaked off him in his shock shattered a solid agar-wood table into splinters, while every teacup, saucer, and dish on that table stayed exactly where it was, held in place by my protective aura, not one drop of tea spilled. The gap between what he could do and what I could do was, roughly, the gap between a thrown rock and the ground it lands on. "How?" Gao Ren said, staring at the intact teacups sitting on the wreckage of the table. "Practice," I said. "I should mention, for your entertainment, that I had by now learned the signature of the flying immortal body, the beautiful, ethereal, spiritual, transcendent flying immortal body, and that its actual finishing move is to condense an entire mountain and drop it on people. That's it, the most elegant physique of the age crushes its enemies with a mountain. Mei Lai was personally offended. I found it delightful. I pointed Gao Ren toward his own flying immortal peak and told him to go look at his sex-founding wall and left it at that. And later he found what I meant him to find. The flying immortal seal, the founder's art that refines a whole living spirit peak into a seal that falls on your enemies like, you guessed it, a mountain, but a mountain with a soul in it, unbreakable, unshakable. The perfect counter to a soul attack, which mattered because at that exact moment the Chosen One was picking up a soul attack. Here's what happened to Zio Jian while my back was turned. Fleeing the sea, cooked and furious, he got sucked into a hidden cave and found the soul-devouring pearl, an evil path artifact left by the soul-devouring old man, dead 1,000 years, an object that eats souls and feeds them to its owner. Zio Jian being Zio Jian, he refined it on the spot, and his cultivation rocketed toward late spirit accumulation on a diet of devoured souls. He was thrilled. He should not have been, because inside the pearl a tiny shadow of the old dead man was still awake, and it grew a little stronger every time Zio Jian fed it his own aura, and Zio Jian's tone, if you were listening, and I was always listening, got a little more sinister every day. The Chosen One had just swallowed the seed of his own corruption and called it a lucky break. Give it time. Then the 10-sex tournament came, and I attended it for the first time across 100 lives as a spectator. In the stands, eating snacks, watching. I should explain the machine that made it worth watching because it's the best trick I ever pulled and I didn't lift a finger to do it. My whole existence, remember, was to be the great villain, which meant I was also the great stepping stone. And all the villain's luck the story generated used to pour through Snow Moon Peak and my juniors and flow straight into the Chosen One, feeding him experience packs to grind on his way up. But I'd left. I'd severed the anchor. So that river of luck lost its channel, and the formless will, forced to improvise, redistributed all of it, evenly, across every outstanding disciple of all 10 sects. You have to understand how badly that backfired. Geniuses aren't held back by a lack of luck. They're held back by one last small weakness, one missing piece. And the story had just handed every top genius on the continent exactly the little dose of fortune that filled their last gap. The experience packs meant to feed the chosen one turned, all at once, into a wall of finished, explosive, fully loaded monsters, and every one of them was aimed at the top of the same bracket he had to climb. Jing and of the 1,000 Buddha sect awakened a Buddha heart, which happens to be a hard counter to soul corruption. Liu Yang of the Mountain of Books and Sea of Learning bloomed with righteous Kai that repels all evil, another hard counter. Wu Chen of the Divine Sword sect polished a transparent sword heart that cuts through illusion and taint. Cheng Da got a Vajra indestructible body. Ming Yu, the Yin Hua sect saintess, took a stray thread of luck and started walking straight toward a yin-yang sacred body. On and on, 10 sects deep, every one of them by pure accident, built into a natural nightmare for a boy carrying a soul-devouring pearl. The final ranking put Gao Ren first and Zio Jian a strained second. My 3 former junior siblings, deprived of the person who used to strategize their every step, cratered the best of them, Ming Zi, scraped in at 36th, and even that hurt him. "You didn't touch any of it," Mei Lai said, 3 inches tall on my shoulder, working through a bag of roasted melon seeds she'd acquired somewhere. "I touched one thing," I said. "I left. Everything else is just what the world does when the villain stops holding the door for the hero." I cracked a seed. Turns out I was doing a lot of unpaid work. Down in the arena, the Chosen One scraped through his bracket by grit and Tao Heaven's spirit medicine, every single opponent a knife shaped exactly wrong for him, and climbed, bleeding, toward a final that the whole tournament had been quietly building into a trap with his name on it. I got comfortable. The best part was coming, and for once I had a good seat. The final was Gao Ren against Zio Jian, genius against Chosen One, my accidental student against the boy the whole world had spent 100 lifetimes lifting up. For once, the world's favorite didn't have the counters. Zio Jian opened with the soul-devouring pearl, the way he'd been opening every match, reach past the flesh, past the guard, straight for the soul and eat. It had carried him through the whole bracket by the skin of his teeth, and against Gao Ren it did nothing because Gao Ren dropped a mountain on it. That's the short version. The long version is that the flying immortal seal condensed a whole spirit peak's worth of unshakable weight around Gao Ren's divine soul, and a soul under a mountain is a soul the pearl can't get its teeth into, while the same mountain came down on Zio Jian from the outside, over and over, crushing him toward the edge of the ring. The Chosen One's one trick was a knife, and Gao Ren had turned himself into a mountain range. There's no clever counter to geography. At the end, Gao Ren did something I'd have talked him out of if I'd been closer. He reached out and grabbed the soul-devouring pearl with his bare hand, took its full corrosive bite, lost the flesh off his whole left palm, skin and muscle sloughing away to the bone, and used that grip to plant a miniseal directly into Zio Jian's gut and blast him clean out of the arena. The bell rang. Gao Ren won. The Chosen One lost the biggest stage of his young life on his father's home ground in front of the whole righteous world. Then both of them collapsed spent, and the thing everyone had forgotten woke up. The soul-devouring pearl lifted off the ground on its own. Inside it, the remnant of the soul-devouring old man, the 1,000-year-dead thing Zio Jian had been feeding this whole time, had had quite enough of being a stepladder for a teenager, and it went for the throat of the only person nearby who could hurt it, the unconscious victor. It shot at Gao Ren's exposed soul to murder him where he lay. I'll admit my hand twitched. I have my own history with that pearl in a life I don't like to revisit. That same remnant ambushed me, and I killed it, and it cost me my body and years of crippled seclusion to do it. I know exactly how it fights. I was already halfway out of my seat. I didn't have to be. A flying, immortal elder named Lan got there first, cut in, shielded the boy, and cracked the pearl across its heart with one furious strike, scattering the remnant before it could finish its lunge. And the tournament ended in the single most satisfying scandal I have ever personally not caused. Because to every righteous sect in those stands, the picture was perfectly clear. Tao Heaven's champion, having lost, tried to murder the victor in his sleep with an evil path artifact. Never mind that it was the artifact acting on its own. Never mind that Zio Jian was unconscious. What everyone saw was the Chosen One's pearl going for a downed opponent's soul. Sect leader Zio Guang had to gather his beaten, disgraced son off the arena floor and carry him out under the eyes of the whole continent, while the flying, immortal sect master, barely hiding his glee, began composing a very long list of the reparations Dao Heaven now owed for the attempted assassination of his prized disciple. 50 years of tournament wins, 50 years of being the untouchable head of the 10 sects, and Dao Heaven's sect took second place and walked out of it a laughingstock, poorer and smaller and openly humiliated, and every visible crack in it traced back, if you followed it far enough, to the day a crippled eldest disciple asked to leave the mountain. "They buried you a season ago," Mei Lai said, watching Zio Guang's stiff back disappear off the field, "and you're still costing them money." "Compound interest," I said. "It's the 8th wonder of the world." I finished my snacks. I did not gloat out loud in public because a dead man has to keep some dignity. I gloated on the inside at length with real craftsmanship. And then the Xuanji secret realm opened, and the world invited me in, which had never, in 100 lives, happened before. The Xuanji secret realm is the reason the 10 sects tolerate each other at all. It opens rarely, it holds a secret said to advance the whole continent, and it is a slaughterhouse, because the moment it cracks open, every evil and demonic cultivator on the continent pours in behind the righteous geniuses to murder them and steal their fortunes. This year the demon path even had a kill list, helpfully leaked. Number 1, Gao Ren, kill on sight. Number 2, Zio Jian, take alive, because rumors about his background had started to spread. My 3 former junior siblings qualified for it. They went in without me for the first time, mocking my old restrictions as they passed the gate, all the careful rules I used to give them to keep them breathing. We'll get back to how that goes for them. And then the realm invited me. I felt the gate's attention turn, felt the invitation settle over me like a hand on the shoulder, and for a moment I just stood there because in 100 lifetimes this had never happened. The Xuanji realm had never once opened for the villain. The villain was scenery. The villain was the obstacle you cleared on the way in, and here it was, holding the door. "That's not a normal invitation," Mei Lai murmured, wary. "That reads like inviting the wolf into the sheep pen. Or the sheep into the wolf's. Only one way to find out," I said and stepped in, and the instant the realm swallowed me, the luck around the Xuanji gate twisted into total obscurity, and I felt the formless will lose its grip on the whole place at once, like a hand slipping off a wet rope. Interesting. I landed in a barren yellow wilderness, and I was immediately surrounded by demon cultivators. A dozen of them, wreathed in skull magic and killing intent, and they opened up on me all at once. Soul flames, bone spears, the whole grim catalog. I stood in it. When the dust cleared and I was standing there without a scratch, brushing ash off my sleeve, I said what I always say to this sort of welcome. Nothing more than this. Then I pressed one palm gently toward the ground, and gravity did the rest. The whole crowd of them slammed flat, faces in the dirt, unable to lift a finger, wheezing out the eternal question of the outmatched. Is this guy even spirit accumulation? I left them there. A boulder I'd already seen coming crushed them a moment later. I don't waste effort on things the terrain will handle for me, and then the realm attacked me, not the demons. The realm itself. A Kai column erupted under my feet, then hurricanes, then a sheet of ground fire, then sinkholes and sand vortices, and a lash of lightning out of a clear sky. Then a divine soul formation of weeping stone faces howling a sound meant to shred a cultivator's mind. Wave after wave, the entire Xuanji secret realm trying patiently, methodically, to kill one man walking across it. Which told me it wasn't the Xuanji secret realm. I walked through all of it. I turned the ground into a war drum under my heels, sky gong and earth drum. I called it once a long time ago and shattered the natural formation from the inside. And out of the broken heart of it, I flushed a single thin wisp of the formless will, a splinter of the heavenly Tao's hand that had been steering the whole thing. Mei Lai's hand closed on it and crushed it like a grape. Then the whole world cracked like a dropped mirror because that's what it was, a mirror. I hadn't been in the real Xuanji realm at all. I'd been dropped into an eerie reflected copy of it, conjured out of a mirror magic treasure. One of the opportunities the formless will had prepared and preloaded for its chosen one, and instead handed to me, hoping the reflection would quietly grind the retired villain to paste where nobody could see. It underestimated how much I hate mirrors. I shattered the false world and stepped out into the real Xuanji realm, which, the moment I arrived, felt warm, felt welcoming, felt on my side, the exact opposite of the copy. Behind me, the real realm blasted the discarded mirror artifact with a bolt of its own lightning, for the crime of wearing its face. And here's the consequence that mattered, the one worth the whole trip. With that mirror shattered and that wisp crushed, the formless will's grip inside the Xuanji realm was broken, which meant the Chosen One had just quietly lost his best cheat. In every prior telling, the realm was transparent to Zio Jian. He could sense every opportunity, could never be truly found, walked the maze like he had the map. Not anymore. He got to grab exactly one prepared opportunity, a little pill room, before the sense went dark on him forever. He found that out the hard way and fast because Zhen Kai found him first. My noodle-stall friend, carrying the star sword Dao I'd left him, walked up to the greatest genius of the Dao Heaven sect and said, "Fight me." And with the formless will gone and the pearl already cracked, Zio Jian lost. Cleanly. Zhen Kai's inherited stars answered him, the 7-star sword of death, the 6-star sword of life, Sha Po Lang, starlight pinning the soul-devouring pearl in place so it couldn't bite. And the Chosen One, out-cultivated, out-hearted, out-fought, fled on a teleport talisman coughing, minus a summoned flying shuttle he had to abandon in the dirt. Afterward, poking through the wrecked pill room Zio Jian had looted, Zhen Kai found 2 starstone carvings, Southern Dipper, Big Dipper, and a broken jade slip that read, in fragments, Primordial Star, Death, Life. A turning point, beyond salvation, the fated person. Some predecessor of the Xuanji realm had tried once to use these stars to reverse a doom and failed. Those carvings had been set aside quietly as Zio Jian's fallback, his backup destiny, in case the tournament went badly. Now they poured their star power freely into the hands of the man who'd just beaten him. I watched the Chosen One's carefully stocked pantry get handed to my friend one shelf at a time, and I thought about how much of being a villain was really just being the guy who does the shopping so the hero never has to. But the realm itself was the real mystery, and it was bigger than any of us. Everywhere I looked, I found the traces of world-splitting sword kai, of top-tier powers who'd fought and died here, all of them, strangely, fighting something invisible, as if this whole place were a giant natural formation, and everyone inside it had been trapped and struggling against the walls. A graveyard of titans. And somewhere in it, I knew, slept the thing that in a life I'd rather forget had come tearing out of these grounds and killed me when I was barely sun-moon and had already crushed the Chosen One. A thing that 2 great sects and a council of hidden monsters had been able only to seal, never to kill. Why did the realm keep seeding legacies into people? Why had it invited the villain in? I didn't have the answers yet. But the realm, warm and friendly now, took me by the invisible hand and started leading me somewhere it very much wanted me to go. I let it. I had a feeling I was about to meet an old acquaintance. I was right, and I was going to enjoy this reunion a great deal more than the last one. On the way, I ran into Gao Ren, who had gotten a little too pleased with himself since winning the tournament, and was standing on his flying sword posing at the scenery. So I swatted him off it into a lake, the way you'd flick a fly, purely for my own enjoyment. Then I felt slightly bad because that lake turned out to be a mountain sea remnant, the drowned inner world of some dead heaven and earth realm expert, thick with the essence of a vanished sea. Gao Ren surfaced spluttering, tasted that sea essence, and felt the door to the mountain sea realm crack open in front of him because he already carried mountain rhythm from the flying immortal seal, and now the sea had come to meet it. He got a realm breakthrough out of me shoving him in a puddle. His master, incidentally, had told him to show off in the realm on purpose, to bait demon path kills so the sect could collect the bounties. Everyone in this world is using everyone. It's very tiring. I only do it for good reasons. That lake, by the way, was the rime of the sea, an opportunity I'd once set aside in the careful old way for Ming Zi. Regifted unceremoniously to a wet Gao Ren. My former junior brother was, at that same moment, elsewhere in the realm with my other 2 former siblings, surrounded by Yao beasts, squabbling over a crimson jade fruit tree they were about to lose to a passing stranger anyway. Chen Lu lifted her head and said, "Senior brother," I felt senior brother, and the other 2 mocked her for it. I walked past close enough to hear. I kept walking, some doors you don't hold open twice. Somewhere south of there, the Yin Hua sect saintess was learning what it costs to be valuable. Mingyu was being hunted through the realm by a dozen demon cultivators who tracked her too easily, because the tracker on her had been planted by her own Grand Elder, a man who coveted her rare Yin Hua power and had decided a dead saintess was more useful than a living rival. Cornered on a volcano whose yang heat throttled her yin body out of trump cards, she chose the crater over surrender and leapt in. Hold on to her too. The world isn't done with her, and neither, it turns out, am I. The realm led me to a peak that shouldn't exist, hidden inside an illusion formation, unmarked on any map, a corpse-nurturing ground. And under it, sealed, slept the grave beast. I knew this thing. In a life I don't tell people about, this exact monster tore out of the Xuanji realm's grounds, and I fought it when I was only Sun-Moon realm and had already broken the Chosen One, and it killed me. And it took two of the greatest sects plus a council of reclusive monsters to merely seal it afterward. Not kill it, seal it. It carried the Formless Will's own aura. It was the Heavenly Tao's pet, and inside its body it held a lump of pure, neutral, unaligned power that was meant to be the Chosen One's ultimate trump card. The seal's core was an azure lotus lamp, a heaven-formed spirit treasure that makes its holder immune to all evil, that strengthens both soul and body, whose wick burns pure divine soul as fuel. In the story, as it always went, Zio Jian steals this lamp, and stealing it breaks the seal, and the grave beast wakes and eats the world until the sects can barely cage it again. His lucky break was supposed to be the apocalypse's alarm clock. I woke it up first, on my own terms. Inside the lamp lived the remnant thoughts of the powers who died sealing this thing. A sword cultivator, an array master, a Yao, an evil path adept, a devil cultivator, an old man they called Old Hu, no relation to mine, the world is full of old fangs, a whole council of the dead, still burning with one shared obsession. Kill the thing they'd only managed to cage. I gathered them. I reforged the Azure Lotus lamp into the Azure Lotus sword, and with their combined will at my back, I stepped into something the story reserved for exactly one person and had never once let me touch: unity with heaven and earth. The child of destiny's private privilege, every strike wielding the whole weight of the realm. The grave beast tried the only thing it had. It showed me a memory, the old timeline, playing out on the air like a shadow play. Zio Jian stealing the lamp, the seal breaking. Zio Jian later carving the neutral power orb out of the beast's own body, becoming unstoppable. And then a voice, vast and patient and so familiar I could have wept from boredom. The Formless Will speaking through the beast. Destiny cannot be defied. This is not yours. Retreat, Mei Lai laughed out loud. A bright, cruel little laugh from a girl standing in the palm of a god. Do you still think, she asked the sky, that were people from your past reincarnations? And I dropped a sword on it, not a stroke. A sword, 100 zhang of edge, the whole realm's borrowed weight behind it, the dead council's obsession riding the blade. The grave beast that two great sects had only managed to cage, the Heavenly Tao's own pet, the apocalypse with a lamp for an alarm clock, did not get sealed. It got annihilated, erased, down to the last shadow. And Mei Lai reached into the dying blaze, plucked out the lump of pure neutral power that was supposed to crown the Chosen One, and carried it home into our emptied system space, where it kindled into a single new star, the first star we'd owned since I burned the other 99 to keep her breathing. The dead council watched their monster die, and their obsession finally went quiet. "We've done what we could not," the old sword cultivator's remnant said, and there was no envy in it, only the deep relief of a debt 1,000 years overdue being paid at last. "We stayed for this. There's no reason to stay now." They bowed to me. Then they let go, all of them at once, and dissipated into the air like a spray of quiet fireworks, and their leaving did something none of us expected. It knit the whole Xuanji realm's fractured consciousness together into one. The realm became, for the first time in an epoch, a proper and whole and living secret realm. Inviting the villain in, it turned out, had been the single best idea it ever had. They left me the Azure Lotus lamp as a keepsake. I fed the grave beast's corpse and seal into it as fuel, cleaned the battlefield down to bare stone, and left nothing at all for the Chosen One to find. He arrived not long after, stood in the empty clearing where his destiny was supposed to be waiting, found bare stone, and punched the ground so hard his own luck surged to pay for the tantrum, which is a thing his luck did more and more often now, and which was going to bankrupt him eventually. The beast's luck, the crown that should have been his, drifted toward me instead. I turned it down. I didn't want it. Taking it meant a fight with him I had no interest in having, and I found myself wishing, absurdly, that Gao Ren were nearby so I could just hand it to a friend and be rid of it. One Gao Ren, Mei Lai said, weighing the loose luck in her small hand like a shopper. One Zhen Kai, their fortune and their blood are more than enough to do the work, she smiled. You don't have to carry the world anymore, you just have to stop holding the door. I was starting to believe her. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor and it is not a kind one, a dormant volcano a valley over, a volcano with a drowning saintess in its throat, chose that exact moment to erupt. The volcano spat a shuttle of molten rock straight at my head, and when I cracked it open there was a girl inside it, magma-wrapped, alive by the thinnest luck in the world. Ming Yu. The crater's pure yang had shattered the seal on her yin-hua body, and now yin and yang were at war inside her, each trying to tear the other out, and she had maybe minutes. I had a lump of loose villain luck in one hand that I hadn't wanted, and a Teiji diagram is just a way of teaching yin and yang to hold hands. So I used the one to power the other, and instead of letting the two forces kill her, I married them. The war in her went quiet, and the thing left standing when it ended wasn't a broken yin-hua body. It was the seed of a yin-yang sacred body, the very destiny the stray tournament luck had already been nudging her toward. Her death trap became her breakthrough. And her grand elder, the one who'd sold her to assassins to harvest her yin-hua power, discovered that there was suddenly nothing left in her for him to harvest. She woke not knowing who'd saved her. I was long gone, a hole in the world, and she swore an oath on her Tao heart, which is heavier than an oath sworn to heaven, to repay the stranger who'd pulled her out of the fire. Then, being a practical girl, she went and found the dozen demon cultivators who'd hunted her, the ones she'd quietly tagged. And now at the peak of spirit accumulation and riding a brand new sacred body, she froze some of them and burned the rest and left none of them to hunt anyone again. While that was happening, I found a very silly white fox, an old companion of mine, a creature so guileless it had once been conned out of its dinner by a rabbit, fed it a profound spirit grass, and teleported it home before the realm could eat it. You have to protect the innocent ones, especially the stupid innocent ones, especially those. The Xuanji realm stayed open only a month, and when it closed it spat everyone back out changed. Gao Ren, sea rime in hand, walked out ready to touch the mountain sea realm. Zhen Kai carried his star carvings. Ming Yu carried her sacred body and her fulfilled revenge. And Xiao Jian carried his soul-devouring gains and a fresh humiliation, because when he tried, on the way out, to grab one more sealed opportunity, the Formless Will's own power flashed down and vaporized his reaching hand's light. That one was reserved for the child of destiny, and even the chosen one isn't allowed to grab the chosen one's things early. Fate babysitting its favorite. I found it very funny. But the news that actually mattered came out of Snow Moon Peak, and it came without me lifting a hand, which is my favorite kind of news. The three of them came home from the Xuanji realm injured and empty-handed. Mingzi, worst of all, the stolen sword technique, the one I'd refused to teach him because his foundation couldn't hold it, had backlashed inside him, and he'd started coughing blood. Ru Lan, freshly out of a seclusion she'd needed to steady her own cracked Tao heart, could barely believe how badly her three prodigies had failed on a stage that used to be easy for them. So they went looking for answers, and in their grief and their rage they broke into my old courtyard, the shabby edge of the peak place, still full of dust and my abandoned scrolls, and there at last they found the maps. The Xuanji research, every page made for them, the exact path Mingzi should have walked, the exact spot Chen Lu should have stood. The specific danger Xiao Hua needed to avoid, and folded in with the rest, a technique called sword-intent body tempering, the very thing that would have let Mingzi survive the sword he'd stolen if he'd only stayed and let me teach him the foundation first. They couldn't read a word of it until they'd already lost. That was Mei Lai's little trap, sprung across 100 lives of watching them. The answers only became legible once the chance to use them was gone. So they sat in the dust of a dead man's courtyard, holding the maps to fortunes they'd walked straight past, and it broke something in each of them. Mingzi broke loudest. He swung the stolen sword in a fury he couldn't aim at anyone but himself, and the blow struck the courtyard's old, decayed spirit-gathering array, and the whole thing went up, foundations and formation and the last standing walls, the eldest disciple's shabby little home erased in a single ugly flash of a technique he was never meant to hold. Ru Lan arrived to find her 3 golden children standing in a crater they'd made, in the ruin of the courtyard that had belonged to the disciple she'd buried. And whatever grief she'd been carrying turned, all at once, to something colder. She threw all three of them into the cold cave. You should know what the cold cave is. It's Snow Moon Peak's punishment cell, its worst one, a place of killing frost. And across 100 lifetimes, do you know who had ever been sent to the cold cave? Me. Only me. On charge after trumped-up charge, for being too heavy-handed, for embarrassing a junior, for whatever I'd done that life to deserve the villain's cell. It had held exactly one prisoner in all its history, and that prisoner was always me. And now the immortal Rue Lan threw the three golden children into it, on charges of destroying what was left of Bai Fan's home. And then she went to the ruined courtyard, and she froze it, sealed the whole broken thing in an ice heart, preserved it in eternal cold, the way you'd press a flower in a book. Her last keepsake of the disciple she thought she'd failed. Mei Lai watched the whole thing through a mirror on my shoulder, chin in her hands, entirely content. After a thing has served its purpose, she said quietly, plucking some small invisible thread out of the air and tucking it away, it no longer needs to exist. She looked up at me. The courtyard's gone, the debt's paid, the three of them are freezing in your old cell for once instead of you. A pause. How does it feel? I thought about it honestly. Lighter, I said, and I meant it. It was time I stopped pretending to be a cripple, so I broke through, properly. In one sitting, from spirit accumulation up into a realm the world didn't have a name for yet, because I built it myself. Let me explain the latter, quickly, so the flex lands. After spirit accumulation comes the mountain sea realm, where you raise mountains and pour seas inside your own dantian. Above that, sun-moon, where a sun and moon rise in your inner world. Above that, heaven and earth realm, the summit of this whole fallen continent, a place sect leader Xiao Guang had only gotten 1 foot into. That's the whole ladder. 4 rungs, I didn't climb it. I built a house at the bottom of it that was nicer than anything at the top. 3 mountains and 5 peaks, and the mountains and seas stood up inside me. Golden crow and jade rabbit, and a sun and a moon rose over them. Then the mountains and seas smoothed into land, and the sun and moon spread into a sky, and heaven and earth closed over a whole small cosmos that was, honestly, more complete and more perfect than the inner world of an actual heaven and earth realm cultivator, even though my true essence had only reached mountain sea. A Kayankun world. A universe in a man's belly, built by a person who'd read the last page of the book 100 times and finally decided to write his own. Which meant I now had a Tao rhyme that owed the heavenly Tao nothing. A world of my own, independent of its rules, and that to the formless will is meat dangled over a starving dog. So I dangled it. On purpose, I raised my aura up past Xiao Guang's, past the summit of the continent, and I stood there radiating a breakthrough the heavens could not possibly ignore, and I waited to get punished for defying destiny, and the sky obliged. It gathered a heaven's punishment, a blood-red lightning tribulation, the kind that vaporizes a man who's climbed too high too fast, and it came down to erase me. And I wasn't there. I went ethereal, a hole in the world, unsensible, wearing Mei Lai-like breath. And the tribulation, which was triple-locked to hunt me by my location and my karma and my destiny, came down on all 3 locks and found the door open and the house empty. It couldn't find me because I'd stopped being a place, stopped being a debt, stopped being a role. It flailed. It burned through a colossal reserve of the formless will's power, trying to hit a man who was standing right there and simply wasn't anywhere. And when it finally gave up and dispersed, it left behind a scorched patch of ground, soaked in the freshest heaven and earth might on the whole continent. A land of divine retribution, still humming with power the tribulation it spent and never landed. Congratulations, Mei Lai said, and with a flick of her fingers she pulled up something I hadn't seen in a very long time, the old system's achievement list. The panel she'd torn in half now half-mended into something ours. A running ledger of my exploits that she'd cheerfully relabeled the Black History list. She read the first fresh entry off it with enormous satisfaction. Achievement unlocked, heaven's punishment, lucky child. That's not a real achievement. It's on the list doesn't lie, you baited a god's lightning to farm free real estate. You are a heaven's punishment lucky child now, forever, it's written down. The tribulation clouds circled for 7 days and 7 nights looking for the corpse of the man who defied them, found nothing, and finally dispersed, riding me off, I assume as successfully annihilated. And then the funniest thing of my entire 100 lives happened. Cultivators came to the land of divine retribution, half-step heaven and earth experts, the strongest people on the continent, to sit in that scorched, power-drenched ground and comprehend the freshest heaven and earth might in the world. It became the hottest opportunity going. People broke through there. People's whole cultivations advanced there. And they all wanted to know who to thank, who had, out of pure, inexplicable generosity, created this miraculous holy site and left it lying open for anyone to use. Nobody knew it was me. What they knew was that some unknown, anonymous benefactor had blessed the continent with a gift. And the word went around in reverent tones that whoever had done this must be a truly great and good person. Let me tell you what that does to a man who spent 100 lifetimes being called the villain. 100 lives I made real gifts, cultivated real students, saved real cities, left real treasures, and every single time the world looked at my kindness and saw a trap, a scheme, a monster's plot. Called me heavy-handed. Called me sinister. Buried me for it. And now, freed from the role, I baited a god's lightning to bankrupt the formless will and left behind the scorch mark like litter, and the entire continent decided I was a saint. Great benefactor, may lie read off the list delighted. New achievement, it's official. I put my face in my hands. But there was a knife inside the joke, and I'd built it in on purpose. Every one of those half-step cultivators who broke through to the heaven and earth realm in that scorched ground would trigger a tribulation of their own. And the formless will, drained now to a shadow of itself, could barely scrape one together. Each new heaven and earth cultivator loosened the shackles a little more. And when the shackles loosen enough, the truly old things, the monsters that have been sleeping since before this continent fell, start to open their eyes and climb out. I was priming the whole world to come apart at exactly the seams I'd chosen, and being thanked for it as a public service. I dusted off my hands, whistled up my paper figurine coachman, a folded man of talisman paper who drives a folded cart. Don't ask, it's a whole thing, and pointed us at a place I'd been meaning to visit before the world got busy, the mountain of books and sea of learning. An academy, a quiet one, a refuge of ink and righteous kai where nothing ever happens, where a retired villain might spend the calm before the storm as of all things a teacher. I really did believe that. I'd read the book 100 times. You'd think I'd have known better. The mountain of books and sea of learning is an academy, one of the 10 sects but a school first. It runs on Heoran righteous kai, the pure, upright, evil-repelling power of scholars, and it takes in students, and because scholars die and classes need teaching, it also hires teachers. You need to be mountain sea realm to apply. I was technically more than that. Nobody there could tell. Mei Lai's pitch was simple, rare calm. First heaven and earth cultivators still months off. The storm hasn't started. So go be a teacher, you enormous idiot. Rest. I liked the idea more than I wanted to admit. The trouble started at the gate, before I'd even given my name. The academy has a bell of propriety. Ancient thing. To ring it you need a token and your own true kai, and the most anyone had ever managed in all the school's history was 8 rings. 8 was the record. 8 was the ceiling. I walked up to the gate and the bell rang itself. Once. Twice, on its own, no hand, no token, the great bronze thing swinging in still air. The headmaster came running. The bellkeeper, a teacher named Ziyu, went white, because the bell kept going. 6, 7, 8, the record matched by nobody in an empty courtyard. And then it rang a 9th time, 9. A number the bell of propriety had never struck. The founding dean's oldest note said 9 rings meant something extraordinary was here, but nobody living knew what, because nobody living had ever heard the 9th. The bell was older than the academy. Where it came from, no one knew. It just rang 9 times at an empty gate the day a plain young teacher walked up to apply. Far off, old hidden seniors of the school lifted their heads. I felt it too, but I felt something the others couldn't. The 9th chime stirred the heaven and earth power in the air. And it thinned the formless will, right here locally, the same way Mei Lai's chimes always did. The bell wasn't just noticing me. The bell was on my side. I filed that away and applied for the job. I got it the easy way. I still had a Shushan token from an old friend given to Bai Fan a life or 2 ago. And I did something the other applicants couldn't. I openly showed Heoran righteous kai. Pure scholar's power, the school's own founding art, which I'd comprehended alone, on the road, better than most of the teachers already teaching there. My name lit up on the wall of renowned teachers before I'd finished the paperwork. A recruiter named Y. Lei decided on the spot that we were friends. Then came recruitment day, and I met the girl who was going to complicate my quiet retirement. Suyi, beloved daughter of Prince Zhenbei of the great Kaiyan dynasty, one of the three great dynasties that hold the north against the barbarians. She was born with the innate sword physique, which is exactly as terrifying as it sounds. At birth, she'd raised every sword in Zhenbei City into the air to help her father cut down a barbarian sun-moon expert and save the whole city. As an infant, that's the kind of talent that gets written into legend. It was also killing her, because she'd spent her life fire at birth doing it. The innate sword physique is so domineering it devours every other Tao rhythm you try to grow, so she couldn't form Heoran Kai, couldn't break through, couldn't advance a step. Her sword Tao was severed, and a dying diviner's tortoise shell had pointed her, with the last of his art at this academy, for a sliver of a chance, a maybe, a rumor of hope. She had maybe 2 years left. She'd refused the divine sword sect to come here and gamble them. Her maid came with her, a quiet girl named Shen Lai, who in 100 tellings of this world becomes the green-clad sword immortal, the one who nearly erases the barbarian royal family before she vanishes. Right now, though, she was just a girl carrying her lady's things, and when Sui passed me, my broken, world-protecting sword hummed. Just for her, a blade older than the epoch, singing at a modern girl who couldn't hear swords at all. She'd been sword-deaf since birth, that was part of the curse, and yet somehow she heard this one. She stopped. She looked around for the sound. Nobody else had heard a thing. Interesting, Mei Lai said on my shoulder. Your dead sword likes her. My dead sword has opinions now, I said. Wonderful, everything I own has opinions. I'd taken a post in the Qin Institute, the zither hall, drawn there by a zither someone had left in my assigned courtyard. And the next morning the bell rang itself 3 times before dawn, thinning the formless will a little more, and the teachers stood around baffled while I drank my tea. Suyi, having heard a sword sing that no one else could hear, walked into the Qin Institute and chose me for her teacher. Mutual, then. Mei Lai tugged one small thread of fate and made sure Shen Lai landed under me too. I let it happen. I was curious. A dying girl who hears my ghost sword, a physique that kills its own owner, a bell that rings for me alone, that's not a quiet retirement. That's a mystery box with my name on it. I've never once in 100 lives been able to leave a mystery box shut. Suyi gave me an ancient zither as her apprenticeship gift. Mei Lai took it apart within the hour to study it. That's just what she does. If it's rare and it's mine, she wants to know how it comes apart. Suyi told me the truth about herself over that zither. The death calamity, the 2 years, the tortoise shell. She said it plainly, the way brave people say the worst thing to get it out of the way. I diagnosed her in about a minute because I'd built the answer myself once, in another life, for my own broken body. Her innate sword physique was too strong. That was the whole disease. It was so domineering it ate every other Tao rhythm she tried to grow, which is why she couldn't form Heoran Kai, couldn't break through, couldn't do anything but slowly die under the weight of her own gift. You don't cure that by feeding the physique. You cure it by suppressing it, by giving it a different road to the mountain sea realm, a road that goes around the front door. I gave her 2 things back, a plain white jade sword which let her hear the sword song again, and a zither score. She decoded the score herself, which is why she deserved it. Played with sword Kai instead of spiritual power, that music did something no technique in her sect ever had. It let her finally command a single wisp of her own chaotic sword Kai and birth a protective aura out of it, a skin of controlled edge. The true name of the technique surfaced as she played it. Sword Courage, Kin Heart. I'd created it in a past life to govern my own warring sword intents, to make a dozen screaming blades in my chest sit down and behave. Now it ran a dying girl's killer physique through the zither Tao toward a realm she'd been told she'd never reach. She wept over the zither. I let her. Some tears you don't interrupt. My first class was less dramatic. 10 assigned students, most of them unimpressed by a young mountain sea teacher, most of them quietly planning to use me as a stepping stone to some famous instructor. Fine, I've been a stepping stone. I know the view from under the shoe. There was one exception. The great Wu Crown Prince, a zither-obsessed prince stuck for years right at the mountain sea threshold, unable to cross it. He was curious, so I played for them. High mountains flowing water, Gao Shan Liu Shui. The oldest song there is. I played it and the whole class fell into a shared vision, a mountain, a river, a waterfall, and the crown prince's bottleneck cracked, because his hard-won C rhythm looked like a puddle next to the waterfall in the music, and the sight of a bigger truth is sometimes all a stuck man needs. Even the bell of propriety, all the way across the school, swayed along to the melody, thinning the formless will a little further every time I so much as hummed. The Crown Prince resolved on the spot to bribe his way into hearing that song a second time. I let him think it would be expensive. It builds character. Then an old friend recognized me, and the quiet retirement got its first real crack. His name was Jia Lai, a wandering wine-brewing teacher, an easy, decent man I'd traveled with once back when I went by in Ming, one of the many names 100 lives leaves you wearing. He'd gotten me the Shushan token, and he knew my face under the new one. We'd done a thing together, he and I, years ago at a place called Fushui Town. We'd wrecked a human sacrifice ritual there and saved a lot of ordinary people from being fed to something. Fed to the Golden Flower cult. Lai's face got serious when he said the name. The Golden Flower cult grows golden flowers that devour miasma and venom and turn them into pure Kai, which is why every purge fails, why the thing keeps coming back. And it's backed by something worse than a cult. An extraterrestrial evil god, the Golden Flower Shadow Empress. A being from beyond this world, near impossible to kill, whose one long obsession across every reincarnation in every life was to catch me and wear my body like a coat. "They're resurging," Lai told me, refilling my cup, not knowing the half of what he was saying. "The Golden Flower cult. After Fushui Town went quiet, they went underground. Now they're stirring again." I drank my wine. I didn't tell him that the reason they went quiet at Fushui Town wasn't luck. It was me. And I didn't tell him that the two men who'd wrecked their sacrifice, myself and himself, had in doing it put a scent in the water. Because a while later, at the academy, a chess cultivator's trapped student named Wai Lei turned out to carry the faint reek of a golden flower on his kai, from an old enemy of the cults. And where one golden flower's scent drifts, the Shadow Empress's nose is never far behind. The evil god had my trail again. I could feel her at the edges already, patient, certain, the way you feel a draft before you find the open door. She thought she had 100 lives of practice at catching me. She'd never once tried it on a version of me that had quit. I spent the next while being a teacher, which mostly meant quietly rearranging fates and pretending I was grading zither exercises. I finished the ancient zither Mei Lai had taken apart, pulled a rare zither soul out of it, and completed the unfinished battle song it had been carrying. A song that turned out to record an old war where the human race beat back the Golden Flower evil god herself. Completing it pushed the zither soul toward the heaven and earth realm and coughed up a bonus, a treasure map, pointing at what looked like the cult's original ancient lair. Mei Lai took one look and went off treasure hunting through the academy's travelogues, delighted. I sent Wai Lei the move that broke his chest strap, and he rode the breaking of that oath straight up into a specially tempered sun-moon realm, then left the school to go settle some scores. I gave him a hand-drawn scatter talisman for the road and a divination I didn't enjoy. A fatal calamity waited for him out there. Certain death, unless he could survive long enough for help to reach him. He took the talisman. Good men always think they won't need the thing you hand them. And I earned, by breaking that boy's oath and by breaking through myself, a doubled comprehension of the bell of propriety. 12 hours with the great bell. And that's where my quiet retirement ended for good, because the bell of propriety had a secret, and the secret was mine. Here's what the bell showed me. A library of light, wielder after wielder across epoch after epoch, each one taking up the great bell to annihilate something monstrous, a bizarre creature, a world-ending evil, a devil that had no business existing, and every single one of them draining themselves to a husk to do it. And then each time, the bell breaking through the void and vanishing to the next age to find the next hand, to fight the next unfightable thing. It wasn't born, it was forged, struck once and flung across time and space. And when I traced it back, divine sense pouring out of me in a river, the kind of tracing that would kill a sun-moon cultivator on the first jump, it led to a battlefield. A young figure and gathered powers, moving to suppress something the records called the Chaos Devil Emperor. Mei Lai went very still beside me, and I felt her recognize it a half-second before I let myself. Because I knew that battlefield, I knew that bell. I'd rung it, it was the Chaos Bell. My Chaos Bell, my doubt-proving imperial weapon from a life I'd buried deep. A reincarnation where I climbed so high and got so tired and so angry that I stopped being the villain and became something the whole world lined up to put down. The Chaos Emperor. In that life, I nearly killed Zio Giant for good. He had to gather a heaven and earth killing array of the strongest powers alive just to survive me. And even then, the only way any of them lived was to banish my imperial weapon out of my hands and across time and space, to get the bell away from me before I finished the swing. So the bell drifted, across epochs, fought monsters for strangers in ages I never lived, merged with some other ancient bell along the way, and finally fell to earth in a quiet valley where a wandering scholar found it, and heard something worth building a school around, and founded the mountain of books and sea of learning on the spot where my weapon had come to rest. And now the villain who forged it had walked up to its gate with the same soul, the same divine sense, unchanged under 100 deaths, and it knew me. The great bronze thing woke. It didn't ring this time. It came, it shrank down out of the tower and settled into my hand like it had never been anywhere else. And with it came a book, the collected insight of every wielder across every epoch, every secret, every fight, laid open to me because I was the one it had always been trying to get back to. Every chime it had rung since I arrived, every 3-a-day toll that had baffled the teachers, had been my own weapon calling my name across the death of ages, weakening the enemy that kept killing me, holding the door for the day I finally walked back through. I stood in the bell tower with 100 years of loss in my throat and a thing in my hand that had crossed the wreck of epochs to find me. And for the second time in one life, a trace I'd left in the world had refused to stay buried. The first was a sword at the bottom of the sea, now a bell at the top of a school. "They keep coming back to you," Mei Lai said softly. She wasn't teasing. She had her hand flat against the bronze, feeling it hum, and her eyes were wet in a way she'd never let anyone but me see. 100 lives, everything you make gets stolen or buried or handed to that boy. And then the sword waits an epoch. The bell crosses time itself. The things you forged with your own hands come home. I closed my fingers around the chaos bell. "Turns out," I said, and my voice wasn't quite steady, "I never actually lost anything. It was all just taking the long way around. So I had a bell that crossed time, 3 students, a fox, and a teaching post. I thought that might be the whole story for a while. I was wrong within the week, because the Golden Flower cult came for my friend Y. Lei. You met Y. Lei already, the recruiter who decided we were friends. The man trapped by a chess cultivator's oath because he'd once crippled a predatory royal heir who'd murdered his way through hundreds of innocent people. It turned out that chess cultivator worked for the Zhongyang Royal Mansion, and the Zhongyang Royal Mansion was in bed with the Golden Flower cult, and the whole tangle was really the Shadow Empress reaching for the scent of me she'd caught on Y. Lei's Kai. When he broke his oath and won his justice, they sprang the trap. Curse pollen, the evil golden dust that eats your cultivation and whispers you into the fold, poured over him all at once. He didn't fold, because I'd handed him a scatter talisman a while back, drawn in my own hand, and it held the pollen off long enough for him to seal himself inside his own chess mind and wait. A man locked in a board, playing for his life against a game he couldn't lose because he'd stopped playing to win. The academy did not take it gently. Headmaster Guang Bo came in person, with 20-odd teachers and 2 deans, and the great Kayan dynasty sent its Bureau of Military Affairs, because a nether cult reaching into the imperial court is the kind of thing empires notice. Guang Bo ran down the cult's grand elder himself, and I traced the residual sword intent in the air to the pocket world where Y. Lei was hiding, and I walked in to get my friend. I beat the projection guarding him without breaking stride. And then, drawn up through the pollen link like a spider down a thread, the Golden Flower Shadow Empress poured into the array to meet me. She wore the shape she likes best, a golden woman, lovely, warm, smiling the patient smile of a thing that has caught me 100 times. She drifted close and told me we were destined to become one, that I couldn't escape, that she'd tear me open and wear me and never take me off. Same speech, every life, word for word, like a song she can't stop humming. She's immune to ordinary attacks, so I didn't use one. Mei Lai handled the board. One destiny-freed system sitting down across from an extraterrestrial evil god and simply outthinking her, move for move. And because Mei Lai is Mei Lai, doing it while leaning on my shoulder and flirting at me on purpose, loudly, entirely to watch the Shadow Empress's beautiful borrowed face curdle with a jealousy no god should be able to feel. It worked, it always works. Nothing in creation hates being ignored like a thing that thinks it's owed you. While she was distracted being furious, the chaos bell tolled once, and the toll peeled her illusions off her like wet paper. The golden woman gone, the real thing underneath. A humanoid tangle of golden flower vine wearing beauty the way a hook wears a worm. And then my slaughtering life sword, the stroke I forged, lifetimes ago, precisely to sever the unseverable, the super vitality of things that refused to die, came down and erased her projection out of the array entirely. I picked up my unconscious friend. On the way out I saw the cult's grand elder trying to slip away from Guangbo, and I flicked a single bolt of Heoran righteous Kai at him, the pure upright power that evil cultivators feel in their nightmares, and cracked his mountain sea dantian clean across, which rather ended his escape. Guangbo and the great Kaian experts mopped up the rest, and the cult's century-old spy network inside the imperial court got pulled up root and stem in a single afternoon. Wei woke up alive with a fated death that no longer applied to him, his luck surging, sliding right off the rails the story had laid for him. And I, being curious, sat down with one of the golden flowers and finally understood the whole joke that the golden flower cult had been built on. The golden flowers are just a spirit medicine. A rare and potent one, they devour miasma and venom and render it into pure Kai, which is exactly why every purge of the cult fails and the thing keeps coming back. But that's all they are, plants, very good plants. The golden flower shadow empress is not their goddess. She's a tick, an outside thing, an evil god from past the edge of the world that found this useful plant and attached herself to it like rot to a log and taught a cult to worship the parasite instead of the flower, which meant I could use the flower against her worshippers. I refined the golden flowers into body-forging pills, golden flower recovery in a bottle, and fed one to Suyi to purge the years of medicine toxin choking her innate sword physique, and one to Mei Lai, who complained the whole time that I never make enough. And then, with nothing but flame and an hour, I forged a little compass that pings any cult member alive by the reek of the stolen gold in their Kai, a hard counter to their one great strength, which was never being found. I sent it to the academy. They plucked the 2 captured cult elders out of a crowd with it like fishing coins out of a fountain, and then went hunting for more. The cult's response from its distant main altar was to bloom a whole field of golden flowers and issue a single standing decree to every follower on the continent. Find the unparalleled offering. Find the one whose sacrifice can call the Shadow Empress's true body down into the world. Spare no cost. The unparalleled offering was me. They put a bounty on my sacrifice across the whole world, and they never once figured out that the man they wanted to feed to their goddess was correcting zither homework 2 provinces north, drinking tea, and refining their sacred flowers into indigestion pills for his students. You could just tell them, Mei Lai said, delighted, watching the decree ripple out across the continent through a scrying slip. Save everyone the trouble, here I am, come and get me. And end this early, I said. They're the only ones taking my career seriously. Let them look. I was, around then, teaching in earnest, which for me meant handing my students the kind of gifts that get a man buried in most of my lives. To Shenlai, quiet maid, secret earth mother, a body that devours treasure and hoards its power, I gave the complete mystic spirit 100 refinements, the whole forging art, not the fragment the Zhenbei royal mansion had guarded for generations, not the scrap that once let the chosen one cow half a continent, the entire thing, and a chance to live through a 100-fold refinement in her own mind, start to finish. I did it partly because she'd earned it, and partly because it made her a target for every forger and every dynasty on the continent, and I was curious what she'd do with the danger. In every version of this world I'd ever watched, Shenlai became the green-clad sword immortal, a woman who nearly ends the barbarian royal family before she vanishes. But that future was built on Suyi dying and fusing into a sword, and I'd already broken that. So the green-clad sword immortal was never going to exist now. I'd handed Shenlai a blank page instead of a script, and I honestly could not wait to read whatever she wrote on it. I should tell you what was coming for all of us, because it changes how you hear everything after this. Kang Xuan continent was not the whole world. Long ago there was one land, the Xuanling continent, and 2 ancient powers split it in half, and the other half, Kang Chang, a little smaller, a little stronger, had been drifting back toward us across the sky for an age. Now it was accelerating. Within 10 years, maybe less, the 2 continents would collide and merge back into one. And when they did, the barrier that keeps the outside things out would thin by half. More evil gods like the Shadow Empress would slip through. More chaos. More rise chances for a chosen one. Easier for the truly old monsters to climb up out of their holes. In every life I'd lived, my worst tribulations began after the merge. Which is a long way of saying, the calm I was teaching zither in had a clock on it. I could hear it ticking. I taught faster. Then Suyi's father, Prince Zhenbei, had a spare slot for a secret realm, and Suyi invited me, and I said yes, because a secret realm was exactly where her death calamity was finally going to come due, and I'd rather it come due somewhere I was standing. The Great Sheng Secret Realm. The Great Sheng was the old overlord dynasty of the whole continent, and its entire imperial bloodline died in a single night, an age ago, wiped out by a curse no one ever traced. And the three great dynasties are its three different surnamed heirs, squabbling over the corpse ever since. The realm was rumored to hold the Great Sheng imperial seal and a mountain sea opportunity. Everyone who was anyone poured in. And the moment we scattered inside it, the realm reached for Suyi the way I knew it would. Wolves herded her, deliberately, not hunted, into a place called the Sword Abode, the building of some dead heaven and earth sword cultivator, and the abode swallowed her into a hidden room where the ambient sword intent and her own rioting innate sword physique locked together and began patiently to forge her body into a flesh and bone sword. A living magic treasure. That was her death calamity, laid bare at last, not a disease, a design. The world wanted to turn the girl born knowing every sword into a sword, and it had been steering her toward this room since the day she was born. She held on. Sword courage, kin heart kept her mind hers. The body-forging pills kept her flesh from coming apart. She held on long enough for me to arrive. I cut the wolves down without slowing, traced the teleport that had taken her, and broke the Sword Abode's incomplete sword formation and the hidden heaven and earth sword intent at its core. Then my Jade Sword's swordsman avatar, the Severance Stroke, the one I forged to cut off my own rampaging sword intents when they threatened to tear me apart, reached Suyi and calmed her screaming physique and cut clean into the forging. And there it was, a half-made flesh and bone sword wearing her aura, the thing the world had been trying to grow out of her since birth. I severed it. And the world played its last card. A world-ending curse erupted out of the half-made sword, the trap's kill move, the thing meant to take her and anyone who tried to save her. I dropped a severance sword 100 jang tall on it and annihilated the curse and the whole gray forging world with it, and I made her watch. Because it was, whether the realm intended it or not, the finest first sword Dao lesson a teacher could give. This is what a sword is for, not to be. To sever. Then I erased the entire sword abode with a sweep of wind, and we came down in a field of dragon blood flowers, and Suyi, dying girl, 2 years to live, severed sword, born under a death sentence written before she could speak, began her breakthrough to the mountain sea realm. Onlookers came, drawn by the sword thunder, and tried to interrupt it, because a genius breaking through is a genius you can rob. I set a formation around her and played a song called Ambush from 10 sides, and turned 1,000-strong beast tide against itself, and one-shot a middle mountain sea elder who fainted for the flowers, and made it very clear to the rest that trespassers die. They believed me. They usually do. And Sui broke through with 2 phenomena at once. A kin fairy that becomes a sword fairy, music and blade, each one feeding the other. A genius among geniuses in a world that had told her she'd never advance a single step. Somewhere a temporal afterimage showed the future that had just died. The green-clad sword immortal, the fusion of a sacrificed Suyi and Shen Lai, dissolving into nothing, its old broken sword crumbling to dust, because the girl it was made from had refused to die. She stood there in a field of blood-red flowers, whole, alive, holding 2 grand phenomena and a future nobody had written yet, and she turned and bowed to me, and she couldn't quite speak. "Teacher," she managed. "You did that," I said. "I just held the door, and I only did that because you were worth holding it for." I nodded at the flowers. "When we get home, I owe you a new sword. Try not to break this one on anything less than a god." The dragon blood flowers were a signpost. They only bloom where dragon blood was spilled, or over a dragon vein, and this field was both, because the great Sheng dynasty's own dragon vein was buried in this realm, and it was dying, and it was the reason the whole dynasty had died an age ago. We collected some strays along the way. Mingyu found us first. The Yin Hua saintess I'd pulled out of a volcano and remade into a yin-yang sacred body, hunting the length of the continent for the savior she'd sworn a Dao heart oath to repay, following the tug of the Teiji I'd planted in her. She'd been beating mountain sea cultivators up and down the realm in disguise, tempering a second hidden phenomenon her mascot of a sect never let her use. She recognized me as her benefactor and attached herself to the group, and I will tell you that a yin-yang sacred body is a wonder of the age and also cannot cook to save her life, brought no rations at all, and ate every fish Shen Lai roasted. Warriors of destiny, truly. Then there was the two-souled princess. We dug the second one out of a cave, half-dead, cocooned in her own treasure. Yi Shuang, third princess of Great Zhu, except she isn't only Yi Shuang. There are two souls in that body. Yi Shuang, who cultivates the phoenix, and a second, quieter, fading soul called Yi Meng, who cultivates the dragon, and who was dying, because a soul that shares a body is always the one that starves first. In a life or two I'd watched, this exact realm crippled Yi Shuang and let her sister soul gut her out. My healing pill kept them both breathing this time, and I clocked, the moment I sensed her, that the whole reason she'd chased this realm was the dragon vein. Yi Meng needed its power the way a drowning woman needs air. So we went down to the dragon vein together, and I found out how the great Sheng really died. It was murder from the inside. The dragon vein at the bottom of that cave was gray-black and weeping, pus sores spawning monsters, a cloud of mind-crushing malice rolling off it, but the corruption hadn't come at it from outside. It had erupted from within, eaten the dragon out from its own heart. Somebody the great Sheng trusted, somebody with their hands on the dynasty's own life root, had poisoned it in the dark, and the whole imperial bloodline had died in one night, and the killer had never been found because the killer was already inside the house. 1,000 years, and the great Sheng's murderer had gotten clean away. I sent the Hunshin ribbon, Yi Shuang's own sealed top treasure, whose true name I'd handed her a while back, to slaughter every monster in the cave. And then I bound the dying dragon in a 5-element spiritual fire array and burned the curse out of it. The dragon, feeling its own mind come back for the first time in 1,000 years, stopped fighting me and started helping. And the curse remnant, dissolving, wailed the only question it had left. Why? Why is someone still helping this family? Why, after 1,000 years, would anyone come down here and fight for a dead dynasty's dead dragon? Because the great Sheng has been gone for 1,000 years, I told it, and so should you. Then I erased it. The purified dragon vein, golden and whole and grateful, blessed everyone standing in the cave before it faded. Yi Meng, the fading sister soul, stabilized, no longer starving, no longer dying. Su Yi's zither and sword took on dragon patterns. Ming Yu's Teiji gained a thread of real divinity. My own inner world evolved another notch, and the dragon left me a parting gift I still can't fully read, a single lotus petal, so profound that even Mei Lai couldn't name the power in it, the thing that had kept a dragon vein alive for a millennium. One petal. I keep wondering what a whole lotus would be. I didn't ask the dragon to stay. I never do. Everything that helps me is free to go. That's the whole difference between me and the thing that made me a villain. And at the great Sheng treasure vault in front of a crowd, Shen Lai's secret finally came out for anyone with eyes. Someone's feud cracked open a hill and revealed the vault, and the crowd swarmed its light membrane barrier, and while everyone else was straining to break in, Shen Lai's body simply started eating. Spirit stones. Profound iron, and then a millstone-sized Earth Mother spirit marrow that even heaven and earth cultivators are afraid to touch. She absorbed it like a sponge takes water, and banked its power to release whenever she pleased. An ancient Earth Mother physique, out in the open. I stood in front of her so nobody got clever, and I kept my face bored, because a bored teacher is a teacher who is very sure nothing bad is going to happen to his student. The Earth Mothers were a device race once enslaved to forge divine weapons, and their epoch ended when they were forced to build a world-killing weapon, a thing I once shattered across the river of time, in a life so far back it barely has edges. Shen Lai is the last echo of them. I don't tell her that. She's riding her own page. She doesn't need mine over her shoulder. We came out of that realm richer, stronger, and short one dead dynasty's murder mystery that I'd solved and told no one about, because who would I even tell? And when we surfaced, the sky cracked, and the era's first heaven and earth cultivator was born. Zio Guang, the Chosen One's father, hoisted over the threshold on my own land of divine retribution and a shove from the formless will so his boy could inherit the title. I'd predicted it to the day. I'd even written his name on a slip of paper just so Mei Lai could hold it up when it happened and say in her flattest voice, "The list never lies." Tao Heaven Sect threw a grand observance ceremony to celebrate its new Heaven and Earth Sect leader and to scrub the tournament shame off its name. Every force on the continent came to pay tribute. And me, the famous young academy teacher who'd raised 3 Mountain Sea students in under a year, I came too. Invited, welcome, walking back into the sect that buried me through the front gate holding a cup of their wine. 2 things happened there that I'll keep forever. The first was the naming. My old junior siblings were there. Mingzi, Chenlu, Zio, Hua, fresh out of the cold cave, still stuck at middle spirit accumulation. And my old master, Rulan, they looked at the celebrated teacher Chang Sheng and something in them itched, a resemblance, a wrongness, a ghost at the edge of the eye. Guang Bo's shoulder happened to block Rulan's line of sight at the crucial moment, so she shook it off. Bai Fan is dead, she told herself. I confirmed it myself. But Gao Ren was there, and Gao Ren went pale because a worse thought reached him first. He turned to the 3 of them, and he asked the question that unmade them. Your eldest brother, he said, the one who died, what was his name? And they opened their mouths. And nothing came out, because they didn't know. In 100 lifetimes and this one, they had called me senior brother, and Bai Fan when they wanted the title, and they had never, not once, learned the name I was born with. They'd shared a mountain with me for years. They'd divided my things over my body. They'd let me be thrown in the cold cave in their place, life after life. And when a friend asked them to simply say my name, the 3 prodigies of Snow Moon Peak stood in a hall full of the whole continent and discovered they had never bothered to learn it. Gao Ren looked at them like he was watching something crawl. You kicked out the pillar that held up your whole peak, he said quietly, and you can't even name him. I sipped the wine. It was, I'll admit, very good wine. The second thing was the duel. Zio Jian couldn't leave it alone. The Chosen One had felt the tailbone chill around me since the day I died, and now here I was, and his instincts were screaming. So he came to me by night, all but calling me Bai Fan to my face, and challenged me to a public spar to test my style, to prove or kill the suspicion. So the sect leader's precious son and the famous teacher went up on a platform in front of everyone, and I beat him. Not narrowly, not with a lucky opening. I beat him the way the ground beats a dropped cup. Bare fists first, pure body against the Chosen One's genius, and it wasn't close. Then the Azure Lotus Sword, Azure Lotus to guard, the Azure Lotus Sword song to cut. And I shredded his precious bright moon sword, and his soul-refining evil art, and his grand phenomenon, the stars illuminate the heavens, the pride of the boy the whole world was built to lift. I took it all apart on a stage in the light in front of his father, and then I stopped the killing blow a hand's breadth from his throat, because Zio Guang was watching and a corpse would have raised questions. And here's the beautiful part. Zio Jian walked away convinced I was not Bai Fan, because Bai Fan in his memory fought like a specific person, and this teacher fought like nothing he'd ever seen, a completely different Tao, a completely different hand. His own certainty saved my secret. He decided I wasn't the dead disciple. He decided I was something worse. A stranger who was simply, casually, terrifyingly stronger than the Chosen One, for no reason the story could explain. He was right about that part. Zio Guang lost enormous face and went home to plan my murder in the dark, the way small men do. My 3 students had, earlier that same day, crushed the Snow Moon trio in a simple clash of auras, and when Ru Lan, offended, lashed a whip of mystic yin cold at the children, I shattered it. A mountain sea teacher breaking a sun-moon mystic yin bodies cold, in the open, in front of her. She felt the threat of me then, really felt it, and pulled her people back, and could not say why her dead disciple's face kept swimming up out of a stranger. My 3 students, in unison, informed me that they did not like her. No, I agreed. Neither do I. That night I sent Guang Bo a vision, his own future heaven and earth self, dancing the true sword Tao, the real road to the summit, to undo the false lesson Zio Guang had fed the world on purpose. Because a genuine heaven and earth sword cultivator on the righteous side was exactly what the war coming over the horizon would need. And the war was coming, fast. Here is what I did on my days off, while I was pretending to be a zither teacher. There were demon seas sealed under the continent. Ancient calamities, each one a hidden main-body demon that spawns endless copies of itself by devouring the sky, and the seals all whisper to each other in the dark, so that when one cracks, the rest begin to strain. In the story, as it always went, 8 of them woke and merged and very nearly scoured the world clean of people. And then the Chosen One rose up and ended it, and took the glory, and the survivors wrote his name in gold. His finest hour. His alarm clock had 8 bells. I turned them off one at a time before they could ring. I dug the first out of a mountain. I climbed my power up to peak Sun Moon, the golden crow and the jade rabbit of my own inner cosmos lending me a false crown. And I killed the main body in its half-sealed sleep, with sun fire that burns even a heaven and earth body, and a yin cold that shatters even a heaven and earth soul, catching the thing's spirit as it tried to flee. That first kill happened to sit under the Yin Hua sect's mountain, and killing it happened to save the Yin Hua sect leader, who had died in that demon sea in more lives than I care to count. She never knew. That's the theme, if you hadn't noticed. The second slept inside a golden Buddha statue in a Buddhist kingdom, where they mark every outsider at the gate, and an old monk tried to read my mind and freeze my soul for the crime of walking in. I shattered his telepathy, iced his projection to the edge of crippling, left a Yin Hua clone to keep my seat warm, slipped into the Buddha statue on a golden escape, and killed the demon in the belly of a god. 2 crystals now dropped into my inner seas, each one a fragment of the raw Tao of creation, which is why these things spawn forever, and which is exactly why they are so very good to eat. The third was the strongest, past a fortress pass called Jiayuan City, in the ruin of an old temple in the Yao race's mountains. That one had recovered far more than the others. It could possess demons to make them stronger, so that you had to kill every single thing it touched, or it would climb back up out of the corpse. We had a long conversation, the 2 of us, mostly through a bow, because by then I had the bow. I'd taken the chains and arrows the sealers had bound those demon seas with, and I'd forged them into a heaven-shaking bow, no string, just a frame. You draw a bowstring out of the empty air and a heaven and earth kai and an arrow of golden crow and jade rabbit light, and you loose it, and things stop existing. I drained the third seal's demon sea of its origin kai, which is a demon sea's one true poison, and I filled it full of light arrows. And when it turned on its own spawned copies to feed one last desperate strike, I put a golden crow divine fire arrow, a real heaven and earth attack, 90% of everything I had through its heart. That crystal was special. It could sense every other demon sea's location and birth new main bodies given enough to eat. It was the one that becomes the leader of the 8, the one that merges the calamity. I put it in my belly and used it to find all the others. And so, one seal at a time, I ate the apocalypse. 7 of them, 7 crystals of creation power that woke seas and dragon veins in my inner world and turned my Kayankun cosmos into something that, on quiet nights, genuinely unsettled me. I killed the end of the world as a hobby. Nobody ever knew. I was very busy being nobody. The 8th had already cracked before I got to it, out in the great Kayan dynasty, and that one couldn't be a secret because an army was already fighting it. Wai Lei was there, and the great Kayan legions, and Tao Heaven reinforcements, all besieging a broken demon sea main body that kept reviving itself by detonating its own guards. Even the righteous side's strongest had to keep retreating. And in the middle of that battle, Guang Bo, whom I'd been quietly teaching the true sword Tao behind Zhao Guang's false one, broke through on the field under fire into the heaven and earth realm. The era's second. Man and sword as one, furious that Zhao Guang had nearly tricked him off the true path, he led the assault like a drawn blade. I came to that one myself, disguised, light armor, altered face, the heaven-shaking bow as a safeguard against the formless will and against Zhao Guang, who I did not trust to fight honestly. And I was right not to. Because the era's celebrated first heaven and earth cultivator, the Chosen One's own father, was not in the battle at all. He was hiding at the edge of it, wrapped in a void escape seal, the Chosen One's future favorite escape treasure. A thing I've suffered under and later learned to shatter, waiting, patiently, cowardly, to swoop in and take the credit after Guang Bo and the demon had bled each other white. So I put a black arrow into the fight. A forbidden one, rune-carved, the kind that forces a monster to spend its best trick to survive. And when the demon sea burned its spatial distortion trump to live, the ripples of torn space reached out and yanked Zhao Guang bodily out of his hiding place, into the open, in front of everyone. The first heaven and earth cultivator of the age, the great and mighty sect leader Zhao Guang, exposed cowering at the rim of the battle he was supposed to be leading, caught in the act of vulturing his own allies. The demon C, tasting the spatial aura, decided Zio Guang was the archer who'd hurt it, and charged him in a rage, swapped places with one of its guards, whose self-detonation killed the one man in that army Zio Guang actually loved, his secret confidant, the law enforcement hall master. And while the demon was distracted hating the wrong man, Guangbo drove man and sword straight through the vital point my black arrow had already cracked open, and it was over. The demon C dissolved. The eighth bell went silent. The apocalypse that the Chosen One was supposed to end, for his legend, simply never happened, because a masked archer nobody could find had spent a season turning off the alarm clocks one by one. I vanished, of course, the celebrated, unfindable mystery archer. Zio Jian happened to catch the last main body's fallen crystal on his way past, his luck delivering itself even at his lowest, and Zio Guang went home bereaved and humiliated and burning to hunt the archer who'd unmasked him. And that was the day the real war began, because that same season, the demonic path finally birthed its own first heaven and earth cultivator, the Blood Sea sect master, whose whole creed is that the Blood Sea never dries, and so his people never die, and he began pulling the demon sects together into one fist. Tao and demon, two heaven and earth powers on each side now, and the whole continent tipping at last into the long, ugly war it had been holding its breath against for 1,000 years. Zio Guang and Guangbo, the two heaven and earth cultivators of the righteous side, were both anomalies. Both of them had crossed the threshold years early. Both of them, if you followed the thread back far enough, existed because a crippled disciple once asked to leave a mountain and pulled one thread, and the whole tapestry started coming apart in exactly the pattern he'd chosen. I'd like to say I felt guilty about accelerating a world war. I'd read this book 100 times. The war always came. The only question that ever changed was who'd be standing when it did, and this time, for once, it wasn't going to be the people who'd earned it by feeding men into cauldrons and burying disciples in the snow. Between apocalypses, the 10,000 Medicines Valley opened its garden, a secret realm full of medicine beasts, Yao creatures that had eaten a single spirit medicine and grown near impossible to kill. I went for the seeds. My inner world was a bottomless garden now, and it wanted planting. So I wandered pocketing seeds and flicking medicine beasts off my sleeve, and I followed a divination north, into a mist that ate spiritual sense, past a corrosive vine hung with golden flowers. And there she was, waiting for me, wearing a friend's face. Hua King, the girl whose life I'd crossed paths with more than once, hung in the vine's grip, and the thing looking out through her eyes was the golden flower shadow empress. Her power had crept into the garden through the golden flowers, filled the vine, filled the girl, and hoisted the whole possession up to the sun-moon realm to meet me. She smiled at me with a stolen mouth, and she said the two words she has said to me in one form or another across 100 lifetimes, in the low, delighted, certain voice of a thing that has never once doubted it would win. "Found you," she breathed. Again, my oldest and most patient stalker. In every life she caught my scent eventually, and in every life she wanted the same thing, not to kill me, worse than kill me, to tear me open and wear my body like a coat and never take it off. She had chased me through the ruin of 100 deaths. She knew my every trick. She had, by her own reckoning, a century of practice at catching me. And she had never, not once, tried it on a version of me that had already gotten everything it wanted. That's the thing she couldn't feel across the distance, and it was the only thing that mattered. Every other time she'd caught me, I'd been the villain, cornered, spent, holding a losing hand, half-mad, carrying 100 years of grief like a stone, something for her to break. This time she'd tracked a man who'd quit the job, who taught zither, who had a fox and a girl and 3 ridiculous students and a bottomless garden in his belly and a bell that crossed time to come home to him. This time she caught the retired one, the unbroken one, the one with nothing left to take. She led with the pollen. Her whole arsenal, really, the parasite dust that gets past any guard and roots in you and turns you into more of her. And it hit a wall it had never met before because I unfolded a barrier around myself that was a projection of my own inner world's edge, the shell of a cosmos I'd built with my own hands, and her pollen couldn't so much as touch it. Her one great trick, the thing that made her unkillable, simply didn't work on a man who carried his own sky. So it became a brawl, and a brawl I could win. Yin Hua divine light froze the vine. The 5 Peaks seal came down and shattered her borrowed arms and the treasures on the girl she was wearing. The four seas seal broke over her like weather. And then the kun-peng in my inner sea lifted its head, and the whole ocean I'd been growing rose with it, and I brought a world down on an evil god the way her own cult brings down mountains, except mine had a kun-peng in it. She'd never been on this side of it. She screeched, she who does not screech, and to save herself she tore open space itself, ripped a hole to a world fragment on the far side, a floating shard of some dead realm leaking an ocean of wood spirit Kai. That was what she'd really come to the garden for, and now she flooded herself with it to heal, and it scattered my seas, and for one breath she thought she'd turned it around. She always forgets that everything cuts two ways. Wood spirit Kai is life, but every living thing decays, and decay is just life read backwards, and I have never in 100 lifetimes met a power I couldn't turn inside out. I reached into her healing flood and pulled the decay up out of it, and I fed her own borrowed life force to the rot. And I used the power of decay to erase the wisp of her divine sense out of Hua King entirely. The girl dropped free of the vine, alive, her body, from the evil god's leftover power and my leftover seal, and a bath of raw wood kai, waking a wood spirit body she'd never been born with. My oldest stalker got flushed out of a stranger and sent howling back across the void with nothing. And then I turned to the hole she'd torn in space, and I looked at 3 or 4 spirit peaks worth of floating dead world hemorrhaging endless power, and I did what any responsible retiree would do. "May lie," I said. "Bring the cart around." She grinned. The chaos bell tolled, and the two of us reached out and dragged the entire world fragment down into my inner world to sort through at my leisure, like hauling a fallen chandelier home in a wheelbarrow. Except when I got it home, it wasn't a stranger's dead world at all. Deep inside the fragment there was a stone tablet, worn thin by time, leaking wood spirit Kai, and it was a hanging garden. My hanging garden. A spirit medicine garden I'd grown with my own hands in some past life, that was supposed to self-destruct when I died, and hadn't. It had survived. Time-worn, half-forgotten, adrift in the wreckage of a dead world, it had survived, and now it drifted down into my inner cosmos and rooted there. And out of the meeting of my old garden and my new one, a small white creature was born. An innate medicine beast, blinking, guileless, immediately and entirely mine to tend my seeds forever. 3 times now, a sword at the bottom of the sea, a bell at the top of a school. And now a garden at the bottom of a dead world, come home the long way around. Hua King woke on the grass, alive, remade, and stared at me with the specific expression of a person who has just learned she was 2 seconds from being furniture in an evil god's wardrobe, and was saved by a man who then robbed the crime scene of an entire small world. "Who," she managed, "are you?" I thought about all the answers to that, the villain, the teacher, the dead disciple. The Chaos Emperor, the great benefactor, the unparalleled offering, the man 100 lives couldn't kill and 100 deaths couldn't keep buried. "Nobody," I said, and I meant it kindly. Just a man who keeps finding his things where he left them. I was home in my courtyard, running my automated forges, pills and talismans and artifacts crafting themselves in neat little rows, while the white fox lunged hopefully at anything that popped out warm, when the jade sword on my belt lit up with a message that put me on the road inside a breath. Great Wu, the city of Jiangling. Another ghost realm had opened, and my 2 students were trapped inside it, and whether they were alive was unknown. Suyi and Shen Lai had been on an errand nowhere near Jiangling, but Suyi had caught traces of northern barbarians, the Zhenbei royal mansion's oldest enemies, the people who'd hunted her every year of her childhood, and she'd turned aside to follow them. It hadn't been barbarians. It had been corpse cultivators wearing barbarian markings, and they'd set a sacrificial formation to tear open a passage to the nether ghost realm, a place of endless yin and endless hungry ghosts, exactly the sort of pantry a corpse cultivator dreams about. And my 2 students had dived into the rift to escape them, and the rift had closed behind them. The white fox insisted on coming. It had 3 tails now, and it had comprehended spatial leap, and it flickered along beside me the whole way, blinking out and reappearing at my shoulder, very pleased with itself. Protect the innocent, especially when the innocent has learned to teleport and refuses to be left home. In Jiangling, I put on a face that wasn't mine, allied with the city lord, a formation master doing his stubborn best to stall the corpse cultivators, and I hijacked their own sacrificial formation right out from under them. I one-shot their leader, a peak sun moon corpse called Zhao Bing with the Mount Tai seal and rounded up the rest. Then I did the thing that I suspect is going to define my whole life whether I like it or not. I raised the 10,000 swords of the entire city into the air at once, the way Suyi did at her birth, the thing that had cursed her. I brought them down. I smashed the formation, forced the Nether Ghost Realm's passage open on my own terms, and walked in after my students. Inside, they were alive. Barely and only because of my pills. Suyi had been fighting ghosts without pause, and her sword Dao was growing in the fight. In the worst of it, she'd fallen into a sword vision where she pierced barrier after barrier, reaching toward a far-off immortal sword she couldn't yet touch. Shen Lai had gone down saving her, her Earth Mother runes bursting to shield them both. I homed in on the resonance of the jade sword I'd given Suyi, and I arrived just as a peak sun moon ghost called a ghost wood forest reached to possess her, and I burned it alive with golden crow sun fire before it finished the reach. I healed Shen Lai and watched her Earth Mother runes devour twice a peak sun moon cultivator's worth of spirit Kai just to recharge. Mei Lai frantically copying down runes she'd never seen in 100 lives of records, and Shen Lai woke stronger than she'd gone under. And then the realm's real owner arrived, because of course it did. A heaven and earth realm ghost king. It had marked my students earlier, meant to harvest them, and it came to collect, a thing that would have ended most sun-moon cultivators just by looking at them. I fought it to a standstill. Golden Crow divine fire arrow first, and when that only staggered it, the Mount Tai seal condensed from the Mount Tai Dao rhyme of my own inner world, a mountain out of the cosmos in my belly, falling on a ghost king's head. Its yin kai dissolved on contact like frost on a stove. It stopped fighting to kill me and started fighting to leave, and it left, badly shaken, having worked out the one thing it needed to know, which is that whatever I was not the mountain sea cultivator I was pretending to be. Getting out of the Nether Ghost Realm is supposed to be impossible without a Ghost King's help, so I made my own door. The White Fox deciphered the realm's spatial lock, and I drew the broken world-protecting sword, and Suyi's gaze snapped to it and stayed, because that broken blade is the prototype of her jade sword, the relic of a dead comrade I never named to her. And sword intent poured out of me instead of spiritual power, a stroke I forged across lifetimes precisely for this. For every death trap the story ever sealed me into to keep me away from its chosen one. Lai Kong, Rift Sky. A slow, terrible cut and space tore open on a green grassland, and I walked my students out of a ghost world through a wound in reality, and the realm fell silent behind us. The Ghost Kings gathered after we'd gone, and one of them reached for the closing rift, and the residual sword intent still hanging in the air took its arm off. And they decided, in their patient, dead way, to never bother me again if they could help it, which is the single most reasonable decision anyone in this world had made about me in 100 years. We came out tens of thousands of miles from Jiangling, on the northern barbarian grassland, which is a story with its own barbarians and its own cavalry and its own long chase to a fortress town. And if I told you all of it, we'd be here past dawn. The short version is that nobody who came from my students on that grassland went home. The shorter version is that Suyi, who was born to die at 18, spent that whole flight getting stronger and laughing and alive. That was the part I kept. Not the Ghost King, not the swords, just the dying girl on a grassland, alive and laughing, tens of thousands of miles from the death that had her name on it. The world kept cracking open new places to fall into, so we fell into a few good ones. A Skyfire secret realm dropped out of the sky onto the barbarian grassland, a whole flame world spilling out of a wound in the air, an ancient sect's furnace where strange fires drift like fish. Every exotic flame in the place tried to swim to me and offer itself, which Mei Lai found hilarious and I found exhausting, and I turned them all down because I wasn't shopping for myself. I was shopping for my students. Suyi came out of that realm with a nameless sword-intent flame born from a sword tomb, my own sword tomb, from a life when I forged blades that couldn't hold my intent and buried the failures. Shen Lai came out carrying a profound earth-true flame that let her forge treasures a sun-moon cultivator would kill for. My girls went into an inferno and came out holding fire, and neither of them so much as singed her sleeve because I'd made them their robes myself. But the place I want to tell you about is the Sea of Learning. The Mountain of Books has a secret realm at its heart, a whole ocean, and its water is not water. It's Heoran righteous Kai condensed into a sea. You can only enter after you've comprehended the bell once, which, given that the bell was mine, took me about as much effort as opening a door in my own house. Inside, you shape a boat out of your own upright kai. The deeper your understanding, the bigger the boat. You can drop your finest techniques into the water, and they become fish. And you can fish other people's out. And the reclusive old heaven and earth masters of the school live out there on islands of pure opportunity in the deep. My little wisp of a boat calmed the sea for 10 lie in every direction, and shrugged off a whole leaping tide of fish that tried to jump aboard. And I sailed it out past a 1,000-mile belt of typhoons that would have swallowed anyone else, into the heart of the sea where the islands are. And there, because I was feeling generous and a little sentimental, I did something the school will be arguing about for 100 years. I wrote my own supreme art into the water. Vast righteous Kai, the Heoran art I created whole at its peak, and I let the sea of learning drink it in. It could only hold the first third of it before the whole ocean started to buckle, so I gave it a third, and a third was enough to make 100-lie island rise out of the deep and the entire sea expand tenfold, scattering fish full of my technique into every current, seeding the school's greatest treasure with a gift it would never trace to a plain zither teacher. The reclusive masters felt their ocean grow by an order of magnitude overnight and had no idea who to thank. Great benefactor, May Lai wrote on the list. Again. I mention all this because it's what saved the Academy a while later when the sky fell on it. The two continents were converging harder now, and the collision shook meteors loose from the heavens, and the largest cluster of them aimed itself, not by accident, straight down at the mountain of books. A single big meteor carries the force of a heaven and earth attack. This was a rain of them. Headmaster Guang Bo was still recovering from a golden flower the Shadow Empress's other schemes had planted in his chest. The school's own formation, without a fresh heaven and earth cultivator to drive it, would take terrible losses. It was exactly the kind of catastrophe the formless will loves, a whole academy of the righteous, erased by heaven, and no one to blame. So I reached into the sea of learning with the token it had given me for seeding that island, and I pulled up the ocean. A colossal figure of Heoran righteous Kai rose over the school, the entire condensed sea standing up in the shape of a faceless giant, and it caught the first heaven and earth meteor barehanded. It threw the second into the third. It swept a swarm of smaller ones out of the sky with a wind called thousand-lie swift wind. And when the last 5 great meteors came down, it met them with a Heoran celestial sun that shattered them one by one, even the last, which hid a sealed evil power inside it, an ancient enemy of the school's founder, which I caged in a scripture and ground to nothing. The whole school stared up at a miracle, and never knew the miracle was their zither teacher spending an ocean he'd secretly poured into their sea. And then, rather than let all that borrowed power go to waste, I brought it down gently as a Confucian text waterfall, sacred words reigning over the entire academy, free enlightenment, Tao rhythm for anyone with a heart open enough to catch it. Students touched the sun-moon threshold. Teachers touched heaven and earth. And in my own warded courtyard, 3 people I loved broke through all at once. Suyi and Shen Lai crossed into the sun-moon realm together, sun and moon rising in each of them, and they tested their new strength on me the way students do. And I caught a sword and stamped down a mountain of earth power and erased a knot of torn space with one aura pulse and sent them both tumbling, laughing into the grass. 2 years to live, they'd told a dying girl. She'd just crossed a realm the whole world swore she'd never reach, and she was laughing in the dirt with her friend. And the third was the fox. The silly white fox, the one conned twice by a rabbit, the one that had followed me through a ghost world refusing to be left home. The Confucian waterfall lit up the divine ability sleeping in it, and it transformed. When the light cleared, a girl stood in my courtyard in white fox fur, 5 white tails swaying behind her, blinking, delighted, and she launched herself across the yard and into my arms before anyone could stop her. "Teacher," she said, tails wrapping me tight, beaming up like she'd won a prize. "Teacher, look, I finally did it." "You call me teacher too?" I said. "Everyone calls you teacher," she said, as if I were slow. "So I do too, obviously." I looked at this creature, a rare heaven and earth spirit that levels up in its sleep, that adopted me somewhere along the way, that had exactly no idea how the world worked and had nearly starved twice to a rabbit, and I put my hand on her head and I gave her the only thing I had that mattered. A name. "Bai Zhu," I said. "From now on, that's you." She said it back 3 times, tasting it. Her whole face lit up like she'd never owned anything before, which I realized she hadn't. "And Suyi, half up out of the grass, watched the fox girl in my arms with a smile that froze for just a heartbeat before she came over and very firmly extracted her. 3 students at Sun Moon. A fox with a name. A world war on the horizon and an evil god nursing a grudge, and my whole small strange family breaking through into the light on a rain of borrowed scripture. For a man who spent 100 lives dying alone, it was, I have to tell you, an embarrassingly full house. For 100 lifetimes, the golden flower shadow empress hunted me. It was time somebody hunted her back. Her cult had been pushing into a lawless place called Anking Prefecture, a poison-choked country of goo witchery and miasma, where the very air carries a faint toxin. There was a reason the Shadow Empress had never run rampant there, and I found it fast. Long ago, someone had built a formation across the entire prefecture that seeds an anti-golden flower poison into the sky itself, a life and death array with a living azure sky wood at its heart. Someone, an age gone, had turned a whole province into a trap for exactly her. I'm still not sure who. I'd have liked to buy them a drink. She was trying to break that trap by stealing a saintess who carried the azure sky wood's power, using a pack of barbarian goo cultivators as her cat's paws. I killed the barbarians. I met the tree spirit that anchored the life array, took a seed and a splinter of its heart, and I followed the golden flowers home, all the way home, to the thing every purge of 100 lifetimes had failed to find. The golden flower cult's main altar. On a mountain, the cult had hidden inside a heaven and earth scene so total that no divination could ever pierce it. I pierced it. I had a map Malai had drawn, and a mountain doesn't hide from a man carrying his own mountains. I want to be honest about what I found there because it's the point of the whole thing. The altar wasn't the treasure. Under the mountain, spread through its whole body, roots in every stone, was a single colossal golden flower, half the size of the peak, and that flower was the Shadow Empress's anchor. The one true tether that let an evil god from beyond the world keep her grip on this continent at all, keep whispering into it, keep sending down her clones and her decrees and her hunger, life after life after life. Kill the flower and she loses the whole world. She becomes a voice at a locked door with no keyhole. So I raised it. I brought the 5 peaks seal down as 5 real mountains and staggered their formation. I answered their overcharged defenses with a Big Dipper 7 stars sword that tore their barrier and cut a 10-lie valley out of the mountains behind it. I uprooted 4 spirit peaks with a wave and whipped mountains and moved stones and smashed the whole altar flat. And when the great flower rose up out of the rubble, spitting vines and parasite pollen, I killed its ability to heal, turned the ground to steel with the power of a mother of myriad gold, so it couldn't drink from the earth vein, then mastered the 5 thunders and ran the lightning through the steel into its roots. The cult leader, who had spent his life feeding people to this thing, got impaled through his own heart by his own flower's root and devoured to a shriveled husk, which is the single most on-brand death I have ever watched a villain earn. Then I finished it, heaven and earth overturned, sun and moon sunk, a falling sun and a falling moon dropped on an evil god's anchor. And when even that left it a sliver of life, because these things do not die easily, I cut that sliver out with the slaughtering life sword, the stroke I built for exactly this, for the things that refuse to end. The great flower withered. Somewhere across the world her clone, which had been keeping Guangbo busy so she could come home to her altar in peace, felt the anchor die and faltered, and Guangbo's Confucian blades went straight through her in the gap. Both bodies gone in the same breath. Her foothold on the whole continent, 100 lifetimes deep, pulled up in an afternoon. And in the ash of it, Malai reached into the dead flower and pulled out a single wisp of light and floated it over to my hand. I knew at the instant I touched it. It was mine. It was a wisp of my own Kai, from when I was very young, younger than the snowdrift, so young there was barely a me yet to take it from. Someone had stripped it out of me before I ever met Malai, before the panel, before the first death, and planted it in that flower like a seed in a pot. That was the whole answer. That was why she'd hunted my body across 100 lifetimes with that terrible patient certainty, why she always caught my scent eventually, why she wanted so badly to wear me. She'd had a piece of me the entire time. She'd been watching me through it since before I could walk. The evil god hadn't been chasing a stranger for 100 years. She'd been reeling in a hook she set in me at the very beginning, in a life I don't even remember, in a world I hadn't been born into yet. I took it back. I folded my own stolen childhood into my own hand and closed my fingers on it, and I felt the last thread between us, the one she'd used to find me in every grave, go slack and die. 100 lives, Mei Lai said quietly, watching me hold the little light. And she only ever had you because someone handed her a piece of you before you could say no. Well, I said, my voice wasn't quite level. She doesn't anymore. I had come to Anking Prefecture to burn down an altar. I left it holding the first thing that was ever stolen from me, a scrap of a child who hadn't asked for any of it, returned, at last, the long way around. That makes 4, a sword at the bottom of the sea, a bell at the top of a school, a garden at the bottom of a dead world. And now the oldest piece of me there is, pulled out of the heart of my hunter's flower. I was starting to notice a pattern in my own life, and for once it wasn't a knife. I keep telling you the world was giving me my things back. Let me show you 2 more, because they're the 2 that finally convinced me it wasn't luck. The first was in the barren domain. The barren domain is a forbidden land, a dead gray country where the very air drinks your essence, your kai, your spirit, even your lifespan, a place so hostile that the beasts who live there are the least of your problems. And when I went in, the barren domain did something no one had ever reported it doing. It got out of my way. The gray soil bled its color out where I stood, the killing mist thinned, the monsters fled. And the omen fled hardest of all. The omen is the barren domain's true terror, a blood-red mist, an ominous presence that turns whatever it touches into a thing that's neither living nor dead, that kills even heaven and earth experts, that appears on you if you so much as speak of it too often. It rolled up out of the deep, ate a whole beast tide and a heaven and earth beast king in seconds, climbed the walls of a fortress city right past its defenses, and then it met my eyes across the field. It sent a thread of its erosion straight down my line of sight, the kind of thing that unravels a soul, and my inner world's sun fire ate the thread before it reached me, and the omen looked at me, and it recoiled, and it fled. Every drop of it. It ran back to the deepest pit of the barren domain, screaming a single sentence over and over, which the old things down there heard and repeated to each other in dread. I don't want to die. Mei Lai laughed so hard she fell off my shoulder. Maybe I killed too many of them in past lives, I said, and I honestly wasn't sure I was joking. Because I wasn't. When I followed the fleeing omen deeper, I found a peak that shouldn't exist, green and living in all that gray, fed by a spirit vein that ran the wrong way, the peak birthing the vein instead of the other way around, karma running backward. And on its summit, under a giant rock, waited a pure white stone steel, and the instant I touched it, I knew it, the way I knew the sword and the bell. I made it, the cloud venerable suppression steel. In a life so far back it barely has a shape, I was a being the histories called Tianming. And I forged this steel out of the larger half of a shattered void, and I bathed it in the blood of every continent-slaughtering old monster and every omen I could catch, and I buried them all beneath it. It had been sitting on top of the barren domain's nightmares for an entire epoch, holding down the exact things that would otherwise have crawled out and eaten the world, holding them down out of loyalty to a hand that hadn't come back in a very long time. The steel's inscription: ward off disaster and misfortune. Slay demons and subjugate devils. I stood on that peak and read my own ancient handwriting, and the top of the steel peeled back, and the 2 words underneath surfaced, Tian Ming, and the whole void trembled at a name I'd worn and buried lifetimes ago. And the chaos bell floated up out of me and recharged itself off the steel, one old weapon of mine drinking from another, 2 pieces of a self I'd scattered across the death of ages, meeting again on a green peak in a gray hell, comparing notes. Somewhere deep in the barren domain, an ancient monster called the Ancient Seer reached out to spy on me. 100 stars melted into his eyes for sight. So I looked back, across time, through the steel, straight down his own gaze. I told him that since everyone called him the Ancient Seer, he clearly didn't need eyes. And I shattered every star in his skull, left him truly blind, fumbling in the dark, muttering that of course he couldn't see. He was the Ancient Seer. That was the whole point. The old things in the barren domain went very quiet after that. I left the steel where it stood, because it was still doing its job, still holding down the monsters the formless will love to use as its chess pieces. And I gave it a token so I could call it to my hand if I ever needed a mountain of buried nightmares dropped on someone. And I walked back out of a forbidden land that had spent the whole visit apologizing to me. You want to know the strangest feeling 100 lives can give you? It's standing in the worst place in the world, holding a weapon you forged before the world remembers, and realizing that every terrible thing here is only sleeping, because some earlier, angrier version of you got here first and made it kneel. I've been afraid of a lot of things across 100 deaths. It turns out the thing the monsters are afraid of is me. I could have used that information about 90 lifetimes ago. The second thing came home on a mountain called Yulun, and it came home wearing the moon. A Taeyan moon appeared there, a spiritual object that only forms once in 1,000 years, that all but guarantees whoever refines it a place in the heaven and earth realm. Except this one had appeared far too soon, which meant something in the mountain had made a new one, which meant something in the mountain was worth finding. So while the Yin Hua sect and the beasts of Yulun tore each other apart over the moon in the sky, I went looking for where the moon was really coming from, and I found a grotto world buried in the mountain's body, drowning in Yin Hua power, and I let myself in. Frost moon puppets tried to stop me, ancient war constructs, each one strong as a heaven and earth cultivator, purified by ages of Yin Hua power into something worse. A dozen of them fired their fists at me like loosed arrows. I froze the lot with a sweep of Yin Hua divine light and walked past them into the deep, where a floating hall hung in the dark, the last standing piece of a palace that had once ridden above the 9 heavens. It was Fairy Yin Hua's fortress, and I knew her story the moment the hall let me read it, because her story runs straight through my own hand. Long ago, in an age of yin against yang, when cultivators of the moon and cultivators of the sun slaughtered each other on sight, there was a fairy of the Yin Hua who found a nameless bronze bell in her darkest hour, and comprehended, inside its chime, the idea of yin and yang made whole. With that bell she ended the war. With that bell she drove out an outer realm evil god and sealed it into eternal silence, and she burned herself out doing it. And the bell struck once, flung across time and space to the next hand that would need it, drifted down the ages, and merged with another bell, and fell where a scholar founded an academy, and hung in a tower until a plain zither teacher walked up and it rang 9 times and came home to him. Her bell was my bell. The chaos bell had saved a world for a stranger, in an age before I was born into this one, in the hands of a woman I'd never met, and then it had waited an epoch to come back to me. But she hadn't cleaned up all the way. Deep in the hall under the light of her materialized moon, a remnant of the evil god she'd sealed was still awake. A formless, tireless thing that clawed at me, took her shape with abyss-black eyes, called me an anomaly, and screeched that it would live again 1,000 years from now the way it had lived past her death. It was nearly unkillable. It reformed from mist. It learned my attacks. It copied my own sword and threw it back at me. Then the chaos bell tolled, and the remnant recognized it, recognized its true master's nightmare, the one weapon in all creation that had ever put its true body down, and it started for the first time to beg. It called for its vanished lord to save it. No one answered because I'd already met its lord in another forbidden land, in another flower, in another life, and its lord was long since dust and silence. I finished what Fairy Yin Hua started an epoch ago, slaughtering life through its origin and the chaos bell grinding the last of it to ash, her work and mine, 1,000 years apart, completing the same stroke on the same enemy with the same bell. When it was gone, her spirit gathered out of the moonlight, bowed to me, thanked me for erasing the last hidden piece of the thing that had cost her everything, and recognizing the bell in my hand, recognizing me as the one it had always been trying to reach, she gave me her moon and faded content. I walked out with a King Hui moon in my belly and an imperial dragon seal in my sleeve, and a strange, full feeling in my chest that took me a while to name. It was this. For 100 lifetimes I believed I fought alone. That's the whole shape of a designated villain, alone, unhelped, unmourned, every hand in the world turned against you. But it turns out I was never quite alone, not the way I thought. I'd been leaving weapons in the dark all across the death of ages, and other people had been picking them up and using them to save their own worlds, in eras I never lived, against enemies I never met, a fairy with my bell, a fishing village guarding my sword, a council of the dead holding a lamp I forged. 100 versions of a man, the story called a monster, had quietly been holding up the sky in 100 ages, and every one of those weapons had spent an epoch trying to find its way back to the one hand it answered to. Some of me got remembered, just never the parts that were still alive. Well, that was going to change. While I was collecting my scattered self across the world, the mountain I'd left behind was quietly falling down, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't check in on it now and then, the way you press a bruise. Tao Heaven sect was rotting from the inside, and the rot had my fingerprints on it, though no one there would ever know. Remember the supply chains I'd built, the fair contracts, the quiet machinery that made the head of the 10 sects run. After they buried me, they gutted all of it for a season's easy profit, and now they couldn't rebuild it, because destruction is always easier than construction, and the men who did the destroying had no idea how the thing had ever worked. Their pills got worse. Their costs climbed. When they finally had to send troops to a war, the whole rickety economy I'd once held together with both hands simply snapped. Spirit stones stopped flowing, allowances shrank, frontline disciples stopped getting paid, and a sect that had 150 tournaments in a row started coming apart over the price of talismans. And Xiao Guang, the first heaven and earth cultivator of the age, the chosen one's own father, had a solution worthy of the man. He decided to steal his disciples' luck to plug the hole. He found himself an old book of fate and hunted the sect for anyone carrying great fortune, and the names it gave him were Ru Lands and my 3 former junior siblings. Which was funny, in the way a knife is funny, because their great fortune was me. It had always been me. The books still read them as blessed because in the fate they were supposed to walk, I was standing behind them, holding every door. Now that I was gone, the blessing was an empty shell. But Xiao Guang didn't know that, so he sent a demon cultivator, dressed up, deniably, as a Blood Sea assassin, to ambush Ming-Zi outside the sect gate and drain his fortune into a formation. They caught Ming-Zi on the same road near the same gate that Bai Fan was said to have died on. Chains through the body, something drawn out of him, and under the strain, the stolen sword technique he'd taken from my courtyard, the one I'd refused to teach him because his foundation couldn't survive it, the one whose fix was sitting unread on my desk the whole time, finally did what I'd warned it would. The sword marks in his mountain sea projection tore it apart. Foundation shattered. Cultivation gone. My eldest junior brother, who once had to fight down a smile at the news that I was crippled, learned exactly what a shattered foundation feels like on the exact road at the exact gate. And Xiao Guang got nothing for it. He drank the fortune he'd stolen and touched the edge of a higher realm, and then it evaporated in his hands, an empty husk with no fortune left in it, because the fortune had never been Ming-Zi's to give. It had drained away to the chosen 1 year ago, back when I still held the door. He blamed his timing. He planned to wait and harvest the other 2. Small men are so consistent. But the part I'll actually keep from that whole miserable stretch is Ru Lan. Because my old master reached the heaven and earth realm too, and when she did, the tribulation came for her, and her mystic yin body, the gift that was always a slow suicide, turned against her at the worst moment and nearly finished the job a full moon had been starting for decades. And at the very edge of failing, a pure yang power she'd never known she carried erupted out of her and steadied her and saved her life. She didn't know where it came from. I did. It was the last of the 9 revolutions pure yang pill I'd fed her on a full moon night 100 lifetimes deep. The debt I'd repaid before I walked off her mountain, still working, still keeping her alive, long after I was supposedly ash on a road. And here's the part that undid her. When her tribulation broke, its overflow smashed one particular spot on Snow Moon Peak Flat, the frozen ruin of my old courtyard. The one she'd sealed in an ice heart and kept, her single keepsake of the disciple she thought she'd failed. She deliberately steered her breakthrough away from it to protect it. Man proposes, the heavens dispose. It shattered anyway. She stood in the wreckage of the thing she'd tried to preserve, with a pure yang power in her chest she couldn't explain, and for the first time in 100 lifetimes, and this one, she remembered. She remembered that everyone had envied her the easy road, the monstrous talent, cultivation like breathing, and that only one person had ever noticed she was walking that road over a pit. That while her mystic yin body devoured her from the inside, one disciple had spent years quietly hunting down anything with pure yang in it, and finding excuses to leave it where she'd use it. That she had never once in all that time thanked him, or asked how he knew, or wondered why the boy she called Lone Star Cub kept saving a life she didn't know was in danger. She'd called him heavy-handed. She'd watched a demon carve his foundation and told him he'd brought it on himself. And now he was gone, and not even a name of his was left to her, and a warmth in her chest she couldn't name was the last of a kindness she'd slept straight through. She tried to rebuild the courtyard out of ice and snow. She got halfway before she stopped because she realized she didn't know what it had looked like. She'd never once actually gone inside it. She had nothing to rebuild from. She let the ice crumble. And she turned and she walked away down the mountain, and there was something in the set of her back that I recognized, because I'd worn it myself 100 times. It was the walk of a person who has finally understood the size of what they threw away, exactly one moment too late to keep it. You could tell her, Mei Lai said, watching through the mirror, uncharacteristically gentle. You're right there. You could just tell her you're alive. I thought about it for a long time. No, I said. The debt's paid, the karma's cut, she got to keep the kindness, she doesn't get to keep me. I put the mirror away. That's not cruelty, that's just the difference between us. She never learned my name, I'm never going to make her learn it now. And I meant it. But I'll admit, quietly, only to you, I let myself watch her all the way to the foot of the mountain before I looked away. Here's a thing nobody tells you about being a designated stepping stone. Because you exist to lift the hero, every good thing you do is scored as a scheme. But once you quit the role, the good things just stay good. They keep working after you leave the room. And I started catching people rewriting their own fates behind me out of nothing but a kindness I'd left lying around. Take Ming Yu, the Yin Hua saintess I pulled from a volcano and remade. I'd married her warring yin and yang into a sacred body and gone before she woke, and she'd sworn on her Tao heart to repay a savior she couldn't name. And then her grand elder, the one who'd sold her to assassins to harvest her Yin Hua power, tried again, tried to devour the very power I'd fused in her, and the yin-yang Teiji I'd planted turned on him like a trap closing and abolished his cultivation entirely. He reached for a saintess's gift and lost his own. She never even had to lift a hand. Some kindnesses come with teeth pre-installed, but the one I keep is her master, the Yin Hua sect leader. I met her once in passing, and I divined her the way I divine everyone, and what I found stopped me cold because I'd worn it myself. She was the childhood vessel of the borrow fortune shift disaster, the exact evil art that killed me in the 10th life, on my little green farm. Someone, an age ago, had bound the whole Yin Hua sect's fortune to be siphoned away to them, while every disaster the sect earned got dumped instead onto one small girl. That's why the Yin Hua sect leaders keep dying young and strange across the centuries. That's why my Zhuruo's master had been installed as a powerless figurehead over a rotten sect. She was the lightning rod, planted at birth, taking the whole sect's doom into a body that was never meant to survive it. I know exactly what that curse feels like from the inside. I felt it eat a whole continent's calamity through one man's spine. It's the loneliest way there is to die, and she'd been dying of it slowly since before she could talk, for the benefit of someone she'd never see. So I broke it. I sealed a curse-breaking Tao talisman into a millennium ice heart she'd gifted me and sent it back to her, and when it activated, it didn't just cut the technique off her. It reversed the whole flow. Every scrap of fortune the caster had siphoned for 1,000 years, and every disaster he'd shifted onto a child, rebounded up the line and landed on him, all at once, with interest. The art that killed me in the 10th life, I turned around and fired straight back down the barrel at the kind of person who invents an art like that. I didn't do it for thanks. She never knew it was me. I did it because I've been the girl at the end of that curse, and I remembered, and there was finally something I could do about it besides die. The ripples kept spreading. Wei Lei, whose fated death I'd cancelled, rode his broken oath into the sun-moon realm and went and got justice at the Zhongyang royal mansion that had trapped him, real justice, the loud kind, for the hundreds of lives their predatory heir had ended. The great Wu crown prince crossed his years-long threshold on a zither song and stopped being a hostage to his own bottleneck. Yishuang, the two-souled princess, took the treasures I steered into her hands and started walking away from the death this world had written for her. Every one of them a small correction, a line crossed out and rewritten, a person the story had marked for the furnace, quietly climbing out of it while the formless will was too busy chasing me to notice. That's what a villain looks like apparently when you take the leash off. He goes around the continent breaking curses off strangers and calling it a hobby, and the world keeps score in the wrong column, and the people he saves never learn his name, and none of it, not one bit of it, is a scheme. I spent 100 lifetimes being told my kindness was a trap. It took quitting the whole job to find out the trap was the role, and the kindness was just kindness, and it had always been real. Mei Lai summed it up better than I could, the way she does. She was watching the Yin Hua sect leader's curse rebound land on its 1,000-year-old caster, chin on her hands, entirely satisfied. You know what your problem always was, she said. For 100 lives, everyone looked at the nicest man in the world and saw a monster. She popped a candied hawthorn in her mouth. And you believed them. That was the monstrous part. That you believed them? I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. She's usually right about the ones that hurt. I want to give you one quiet afternoon before the world ends again because I had a few of them, and they were the whole point. My courtyard by then ran itself. I'd set up automated forges, pills, talismans, artifacts all condensing themselves in neat rows while I lay in a rocking chair and did nothing, which is the correct amount of work for a retired villain. The only hazard was the fox. Bai Zhu had discovered that fresh pills come out of the furnace warm, and she'd station herself beside it, quivering and lunge at everyone that popped free like a cat at a dropped dumpling, and I'd have to pluck them out of the air over her head while she made small betrayed noises. She was learning to read. This was a whole saga. Bai Zhu is, I say this with love, a top-tier illiterate, a rare heaven and earth spirit that gets stronger by napping in the sun and cannot recognize a single written character to save her furry life. I gave her books. She looked at them the way you'd look at a snake. But she's not stupid, whatever the rabbit thinks. She just never had the chance to learn anything except how not to get eaten. So I sat her down with the alphabet, and I watched a five-tailed fox girl squint murderously at the word sword for an hour, and I found that I was happier doing that than I'd been in most of my 100 deaths combined. The rabbit, incidentally, got its comeuppance. You'll remember Bai Zhu had been conned out of her dinner twice by the same gray rabbit, a genuinely diabolical little creature. Well, after she moved in with me, the rabbit came around to rob her cave of the treasures I'd given her, and the cave's own luck, which is not a thing you want to be on the wrong side of, reached out and folded the rabbit up and stashed it somewhere inconvenient. Bai Zhu cheered. Mei Lai laughed until she cried. I felt a deep and abiding sense of justice, which, given the size of the injustices I usually deal in, tells you something about the state of my standards. Su Yi and Shen Lai would come by. Su Yi was so far past her death sentence now that she'd started treating a heaven and earth cultivator's sword lesson as fine, I suppose. Shen Lai's Earth Mother physique had gotten to the point where she could outforge the sect's masters, and she'd sit in a corner quietly building treasures out of things she'd eaten. And Bai Zhu would try, constantly, to climb back into my arms and call me teacher. And Su Yi would, constantly and very firmly, extract her. And the two of them had a whole silent war going about the exact acceptable distance between the fox and the rocking chair that I pretended, for my own safety, not to notice. I had a family. After 100 lives of dying alone in the snow, I had a house full of ridiculous, powerful, alive people, and a fox who couldn't read, and a girl on my shoulder who'd been with me since before I had a soul worth the name. You want to know the actual reason I quit? Everyone thinks it was the betrayals. The swords in the back, the master's cold face, the 99 graves. Those were reasons, but they weren't the reason. The reason was that in the 10th life, for one green season, I found out that I could be happy, and then it got taken, and I spent 90 more lifetimes convinced that happiness was a thing the world would only ever lend me long enough to make the loss hurt. That's what the villain role really is. Not the dying. The certainty that any good thing in your hands is just a longer setup for the same punchline. And now here I was, in a rocking chair, plucking a warm pill out of the air over a fox girl's head, and nobody was coming to take it. Nobody was coming to take it. I kept waiting for the other shoe, 100 years of reflex. And it kept not dropping. You've got the look again, Mei Lai said from my collar. What look? The one where you're happy and you're bracing for it to be a trap. She sighed and settled in small and warm against my jaw. It's not a trap this time, you know. You checked, you broke the leash yourself. There's nobody left to pull it. I know, I said. You don't, though, she said, not unkindly. But you're getting there. Give it another life or two. You've only had this one for a few months. The forge popped out another warm pill. Bai Zhu lunged. I caught it over her head without looking. Outside my walls, the war was burning up the continent, and Kang Chang was coming across the sky, and an evil god was clawing at a locked door, and a boy who was handed the world was slowly turning into a monster no one would be able to save. Inside my walls, a fox girl was losing a fight with the word sword, and I was, for the first time in 100 lifetimes, simply, quietly, unbearably fine. I'd earned exactly one afternoon like this in 100 years. I was going to sit in it as long as the world let me. And this time, I had a pretty good idea of how long that would be, because I'd read this book 100 times, and I'd finally started writing in the margins. I should tell you about two places I passed through hunting those demon seas because they taught me the same lesson from opposite ends, and it's a lesson I keep having to relearn. The holiest houses hide the hungriest things. The first was Daluo, the Buddhist kingdom, where I killed the demon sea in the belly of the golden Buddha. I told you an old monk tried to read my mind and freeze my soul on the way in, and I broke his telepathy and iced his projection to the edge of crippling. And a Buddha's son named Jing and had the good sense to back down after his own past lives divination showed him exactly how that fight ended. What I didn't tell you is what happened on the way out. A cluster of greedy old monks, sun-moon cultivators, tacitly nodded along by their own elders, all of them convinced I was carrying some great opportunity worth murdering a stranger for, decided to tail me out of the kingdom. Renunciants. Men who'd shaved their heads and sworn off the world, following a teacher out the gate to rob and kill him for a treasure they'd invented. So I let my divination steer them, and it steered them into a ruined sect ruled by a corrupted bodhisattva statue, an evil thing that grows fat on evil thoughts, that had once tried to curse me at an auction and gotten backlashed by my own sun and moon for the trouble. And the greedy thoughts those monks carried in through the door were exactly the meat it had been starving for. It let them right in. It did not let them out. The scandal was enormous, and the 1,000 Buddha sect buried it as fast as it could, because the truth was unbearable to a house of the Buddha. Their holy men had been killed by a monster that fed on the evil festering quietly inside their own robes. A sect built to renounce desire, hiding a statue that eats desire, murdered by the desire it pretended not to have. I didn't lift a finger. I just handed their own greed a door and let it walk through. The second place was the opposite. Jiayuan City, a fortress pass, an ancient wall of stone standing between the human lands and the 10,000 mountains, where the Yao race lives. No banners of hidden greed there. Just a garrison, and a sky you can't fly through because the whole airspace is a decaying kill formation left by the old sages, and a wall that has been breached and retaken 3 times across the ages, and in the tellings I know, falls blown apart by its own collapsing formations. Another catastrophe with the Chosen One's fingerprint somewhere on it. I got there in a Yao beast tide, a rolling flood of monsters throwing themselves at the wall, driven by a blood-boiling art that trades their own lifespans for a few minutes of reckless power, coordinated by a handful of great Yao, a mountain lord tiger, a deer whose diviner grandmother had spent her death working out that this was the beast race's best chance in an age, a black panther, a snake. And a beast tide, however huge, is really only as strong as the few node beasts holding its formation together. So I disguised myself, and I stood on that wall, and I took out the heaven-shaking bow, and I unmade the tide one node at a time. You draw a bowstring out of the empty air, and a heaven and earth kai, and an arrow of golden crow and jade rabbit light, and you put it through a mountain sea node beast at a range that shouldn't be possible, and the whole coordinated flood around it loses its shape and turns back into a panicking mob. The great Yao sent their Changui, the ghost servants they make of the people they've eaten, sent to scout ahead, and I burned every one of them out of the air with golden crow sun fire before they got a look at me. And the Yao lords, feeling a half-step heaven-earth hand holding a wall they'd expected to be soft, pulled their tide back because they were only testing the fence, and the fence had teeth this time. 2 houses, one holy and hollow, one plain and hard. The holy one nearly ate its own men on the greed it pretended not to have. The hard one held because it never pretended to be anything but a wall with soldiers behind it. I've been the villain of 100 stories told by holy houses. I've watched sects that fed men into cauldrons be called righteous, and a boy handed the world by a scheming father be called chosen, and a disciple who saved everyone be called a monster and buried in the snow. So you'll forgive me if, somewhere in the last life or two, I stopped trusting the houses that call themselves holy, and started trusting the plain, hard things that just do the work and don't lie about what they are. A wall, a bell, a fox that can't read, a girl on my shoulder who never once in 100 lifetimes called me a monster. Those I trust. The rest of it, the temples, the destinies, the golden boys, the invisible hand writing everyone's part, the rest of it can call me whatever it likes. I know what I am now. It took 100 deaths, but I finally know. Let me tell you what was happening to the Chosen One while all this went on, because it's the funniest tragedy I know, and because you can't understand what's coming next without it. Zio Jian was becoming a monster, not in the way the story meant, in a real one. Everything the world kept feeding him, Every lucky break, every stolen opportunity, every dark treasure that fell into his lap had a hook in it, and he swallowed them all whole because a chosen one is trained by his own destiny to believe that anything that lands in his hands was meant for him. The soul-devouring pearl put the remnant of a 1,000-year-dead evil old man inside his soul. Then he ate a demon sea crystal, one of the ones I'd left lying around, and the demon sea's own remnant tried to possess him, and the two dead things went to war inside his sea of consciousness and annihilated each other, and reforged him in the wreckage into something that wasn't quite the boy anymore. His body became a low, hungry copy of a demon sea. It hungers now. It splits off little human-shaped monsters that he has to hunt down and devour to stay in control. And every time he devours one, he gets a rush of power, and a little further from being a person. He found a secret art called the Metamorphosis Great Art, and started dreaming of shedding his corrupted body entirely on the day he breaks through, and he set his hungry eyes on the biggest meal in reach. A heaven and earth beast king, a mountain lord, that he means to eat whole to force his own ascension. The child of destiny is turning into the very thing his legend was supposed to slay, one lucky break at a time, and he cannot see it, because to him every hook is a gift, and every gift is proof that destiny loves him. His father steals his disciples' fortune. His treasures corrupt his soul. The whole machine that was built to lift him is quietly digesting him, and he mistakes the teeth for a throne. I used to think I hated him. 100 lives of dying so he could shine, you'd think I'd hate him. But somewhere around the 90th grave, I realized he was just the other end of the same leash. I was the villain the story chose to feed to him. He was the hero the story chose to feed on us. Neither of us ever got asked. The difference is I got out, and he never will because he doesn't want to. He's still up there catching hooks and calling them blessings, and one day the last hook is going to catch him, and the boy the whole world was built to save is going to be the thing nobody can. I don't wish it on him. I just don't stand in the door anymore. And the formless will, the invisible hand, the heavenly Tao's grip on the story was getting desperate, which was the whole point of everything I'd done. I'd bankrupted it baiting a tribulation I dodged. I'd starved it killing its grave beast and its demon seas and its evil god's anchor. Every early breakthrough I'd forced loosened another shackle. Every shackle that loosened woke another old monster it had to babysit. It was spending itself faster than it could refill, spread thinner every season, and it knew it, and so it did the only thing it had left. It reached for the other continent. Kang Chang was coming. The lost half of the world, drifting back across the sky, and the formless will was hauling it in faster now, because the merge is the moment it gets strong again. The moment the barrier halves, and the outside things pour through, and the board resets in its favor. My worst tribulations in every life I'd ever lived began after the merge. And out on the far continent, behind an ancient stone wall no one had ever opened, the great Kang's secret treasure was waiting. The vault of a dead empire that once ruled both continents at once, full of the kind of power that chosen ones are made of. In the story as it always went, that vault crowned Zio Jian, his graduation present. The last hook, the biggest one, the one with the whole world on it. I'd already seen it on a quiet trip across the water I haven't told you about. I'd walked up to that stone wall and pressed my palm against it and left a handprint, just to hear the sky rumble a warning at me, just to remind the formless will that its favorite vault had already been visited by the one man it was built to keep out. And inside it I knew was a certain 13-story pagoda, the chosen one's fated equipment, the treasure that in 100 lifetimes always abandoned my hand and flew to his the instant we crossed paths and always got me punished for it. My oldest, pettiest grievance, a piece of gear that kept dumping me for its real owner. I have some plans for that pagoda. They are not kind plans. I've been looking forward to them for about 90 lives. But that's over the water and past the merge, and after the war that was already burning up the continent behind me. That's the next chapter and the one after it, and I'll tell you all of it, the Spear Emperor I owed a debt, the dragon in the blood, the second chosen one on the second continent, the vault, the pagoda, and the little green farm folded up inside a painting at the edge of the world. For now, I want to end where I am, in a courtyard with a fox girl and 2 impossible students and a bell that crossed time, on a continent I've quietly rigged to survive the storm coming for it, with an evil god locked out and a destiny handed back, and 100 years of my own scattered self finally, slowly coming home. Because there's one more thing I never told you, and it's the reason I can tell any of this at all. There was one thing I made that I prayed would never come home. Because the last time I saw it, it was the happiest I have ever been, and losing it is the reason I understand every other thing I've told you. So I'll tell you about the 10th life. I've never told anyone. Mei Lai was there, but Mei Lai doesn't count. Mei Lai is the other half of the telling. By the 10th reincarnation, I'd run the whole gauntlet of a soul that keeps getting murdered by the people it loves. First I obeyed, played the good little villain, thinking a clean performance earned a clean death. It didn't. Then I raged. Then I threw myself at the chosen one and tried to break the story with my bare hands and lost and lost and lost. Somewhere in there I went a little insane. And at the start of the 10th life, for the first time, I did the thing I would not manage again for 90 more years. I gave up. Not gave up and died. Gave up and left. I walked away from Tao Heaven's sect before anyone could betray me, took Mei Lai, who back then had just barely grown a body and a small, blinking, newborn mind, and I disappeared. In that life, the continents had already merged, and the world was stitched through with little pocket realms and hidden small worlds, and I found one nobody owned, an empty green nowhere, and I stopped. And I farmed, that's the whole secret. In my life before all of this, my first life, the one on the other side, before the snowdrift and the panel, I'd been nobody. An ordinary man with an ordinary job. But it turns out a nobody with 100 years of cultivation and a genuine, buried, unglamorous love of growing things can do remarkable work when you finally put him somewhere quiet with good dirt. I turned that empty realm into a farm, terraced fields, a fence. A pen for beasts that never came, a little wooden house with a spell in the rafters to keep the dust off. And to fill the long green evenings, I wrote things down, legends from my first life, the old stories, songs, and books and tales from a world only I remembered, carved into the walls so they wouldn't die with me. I was happy. I want to be very clear about that because I don't say it about many of my lives. For a while in the 10th one, I was simply plainly happy. Mei Lai learned to laugh there. The turnips came up. Nobody came to kill me. Then the story found me anyway. It always does. That's the lesson the 10th life beat into me. What's destined to come, comes, whether you play the part or hide in a vegetable patch on the far edge of nowhere. A curse fell out of a clear sky, the borrow fortune shift disaster, the same evil art I'd meet lifetimes later and finally learn to turn back on its caster. It dumps the calamity of a whole continent onto one man's shoulders. I met it for the first time in that quiet green place with no idea how to fight it and may lie too young and too new to do more than watch me suffer. The idol broke. The turnips died. The happiness I'd stolen came due all at once, and I lost control. It wasn't rage at the end, it was grief. They wouldn't even let me farm. I'd asked the universe for the smallest possible thing, a fence, some dirt, some peace, and it had reached all the way into the last quiet corner of the world to take it, because I was the villain, and the villain does not get to be happy. Not even alone, not even in secret. Not even once. So I stood up in the ruin of my little farm, and I sealed that whole realm away into the endless void so nothing could ever touch it again, and I walked out, and I did not look back. And then I came apart. I detonated, myself, and the entire Kang-Chuan continent at once. And even then that world already held powers past the heaven and earth realm, and they could not withstand what a heartbroken farmer does when you burn down his garden. The continent went to ash. A great many terrible people went with it. My one regret as that life ended was that Xiao Jian, swaddled in destiny, probably survived to use my grief for sympathy. That was the life that taught me the truth I hated most. I could not outrun the role by fleeing, and I could not break it by force. Not yet, not with the hand I had. But I learned one more thing in the ash, and it's the thing that saved me. Every reincarnation reset everything, my cultivation, my body, the whole board wiped clean. Everything except this. Some things, carved deep enough, stay carved. A trace pressed hard enough into the bones of the world outlives the world. A sword at the bottom of the sea. A bell at the top of a school. A soul that doesn't change under 100 deaths. Little imprints, life after life, most too small to see, and 90 more lifetimes of grinding them in, one splinter at a time, until at last, in the 100th, there was finally enough of me stacked across the graves to do the one thing that had always been impossible. To sever the destiny, to quit, to hand in my notice on a mountaintop while Mei Lai slash the sky and mean it and have it hold. So here's where the whole 100 years brought me. Once I got on my knees and begged the world for a fence and some good dirt, and it burned my garden to keep me in my place. And now, freed, quit, retired, unbroken, I was the thing the heavens threw their disasters at to keep them away from their precious chosen one. The villain of 100 lifetimes had become, without the role, the most dangerous Good Samaritan the world was ever accidentally blessed by. I dismantled cults on my days off. I killed apocalypses on my lunch break. The continent called me a saint and never learned my name. And the little green farm from the 10th life, the one I sealed into the void so nothing could ever hurt it again, I would find it again later, folded up inside a painting in a treasure vault at the edge of the world, whole, waiting, exactly as I left it. But that's a story for another day. The continents were converging. The war I'd primed was here. The old monsters were opening their eyes, and the golden flower shadow empress was a voice at a locked door now, clawing with nothing, and the chosen one was still somewhere being handed the whole world one lucky break at a time. Let him have it. I wasn't the stepping stone anymore. I'd walked off the board. May Lai settled onto my shoulder, 3 inches tall, worn out, and she yawned, and she leaned her small head against my jaw the way she does when she's about to say the truest thing in the room. "You know the difference," she said, "between the 10th life and this one." "Tell me. In the 10th life you ran and they still came." She closed her eyes. "This life you didn't run, you just stopped being the door, and now when the story comes looking for its villain, there's nobody standing there." I looked out over a world I'd quietly rigged to survive, with a bell that had crossed time in one hand, and a fox girl asleep in the next room, and 2 students alive who were never supposed to see 19. And I felt the sun trying, gently, unsuccessfully, to assassinate me, exactly the way it had on the morning 100 lifetimes ended and one life finally, actually began. "Let it look," I said, and for the first time in 100 years I wasn't afraid of what it would find.